I woke up from a coma but did not open my eyes. My mother's voice cut through the sterile hospital air. Call the lawyer. That ungrateful brat is brain dead. We can finally pull the plug, collect the $3 million life insurance, and save my house. I stayed perfectly still. Thank God I did, because then my sister added her own twisted plan. My name is Kelsey. I am 33 years old, and my family literally tried to murder me for a payout. As a cybersecurity auditor, I spent my life protecting corporate data, but I never realized I needed to protect my own life from the people who raised me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic relatives who wanted to see you fail. Growing up in a wealthy Chicago suburb meant maintaining an illusion of perfection. My father, Richard, ran a commercial contracting business, while my mother, Brenda, played the role of the perfect country club wife. But behind closed doors, our house was a war zone of financial anxiety and impossible expectations. I was always the scapegoat, the quiet girl who preferred writing code over attending socialite galas. My sister Brittany, on the other hand, was the golden child. She was currently a cosmetic dermatology resident who cared more about designer handbags than her patients. The darkness surrounding me was absolute. I could hear the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and feel the uncomfortable chill of the intensive care unit. A heavy plastic tube ran down my throat, forcing air into my lungs. My body felt like it was encased in concrete. I tried to flutter my eyelids, but my facial muscles simply refused to respond. I was trapped in my own body, completely paralyzed from the severe car accident that had put me here. The scent of harsh antiseptic burned my nose. Then the door clicked open. Heavy footsteps approached my bed, accompanied by the distinct clicking of my mother's designer heels. I expected to feel a warm hand holding mine. I expected to hear whispered prayers or tears of relief that I was still breathing. Instead, I heard Brenda let out a long, exasperated sigh. Finally, she whispered, her voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "The doctors say there is zero brain activity. She is practically a vegetable. Call the lawyer right now, Brittany. We need to get the paperwork moving. If we pull the plug today, the life insurance company will have to pay out within 30 days. That $3 million is going to save your father from bankruptcy. The IRS is breathing down his neck, and this house is weeks away from foreclosure." I screamed internally. My mind was racing, but my body remained perfectly still. My own mother was standing over my hospital bed, calculating the return on investment of my death. Brittany scoffed loudly from the foot of the bed. It is about time she did something useful for this family. She should not have been driving that luxury SUV anyway. She is just a glorified computer geek making fake internet rules for boring corporations. Why should she have a six-figure salary while I am drowning in medical school debt? With my cut of that insurance money, I can finally open my luxury med spa clinic downtown. I am not working for someone else for the rest of my life. The sheer entitlement in my sister's voice made my blood boil. Brittany had always lived way beyond her means, relying on our parents to bail her out. And now she was planning to fund her vanity project with my life insurance. Brenda hushed her sharply. "Keep your voice down. We need to make sure the doctor signs off on the terminal weaning process before Jamal gets here. You know how your husband is. Jamal is too soft. He actually likes Kelsey, and if he sees us rushing this, he will start asking questions about her estate and the legalities of the proxy. We need this done before his shift at the architecture firm ends." Hearing my brother-in-law's name gave me a tiny sliver of hope. Jamal was a good man, an African-American architect who worked grueling hours to support Brittany's lavish lifestyle. He had always treated me with respect and kindness. I knew Brittany was financially bleeding him dry, using his perfect credit score to fund her shopping addictions. But Jamal was not here to save me right now. I was completely at the mercy of my mother and sister. The hospital room door opened again. This time the footsteps were purposeful and authoritative. "Dr. Aris." My mother said, her tone shifting instantly into something sweet and conspiratorial. "Have you brought the final release forms?" Yes, Mrs. Anderson, a male voice replied. As we discussed, the severe cerebral trauma leaves no hope for meaningful recovery. Once you sign these documents, I will personally administer the sedatives and remove the ventilator. The process will be peaceful and quick. I could hear the subtle slide of paper across a clipboard, the rustle of a pen being uncapped. Brenda was actually going to do it. She had bribed or manipulated this doctor into fast-tracking my death. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. My heart monitor began to beep slightly faster, but the doctor ignored it entirely. "We are ready," Dr. Eris Brenda said smoothly. "Our family has suffered enough. It is time to let my darling Kelsey rest in peace. Just make sure the death certificate clearly states the injuries from the accident were the primary cause. The insurance company is very particular about their payout terms." The doctor murmured his agreement. The sound of a syringe being unwrapped echoed in the quiet room. He was preparing the paralytic and the sedative. He was going to stop my heart. I was trapped in the dark, fully conscious, and listening to my own murder being scheduled like a business transaction. Panic flared wildly in my chest. I had to move. I had to do something. The ventilator hissed, pushing another mechanical breath into my lungs. I focused every single ounce of my remaining willpower on my left hand. I needed just one muscle to obey my command before the doctor pushed that lethal injection into my intravenous line. My left wrist felt heavy, bound by medical tape and the lingering trauma of the crash. But underneath the tape, the cold metal of my smartwatch pressed against my skin. As a digital privacy consultant who constantly dealt with hostile corporate espionage, I never left my personal security to chance. I had custom programmed a hard-press macro on the side button of my watch. A single prolonged squeeze would instantly broadcast an emergency SOS directly to my law firm's encrypted server, bypassing all standard networks. The doctor's footsteps moved closer to my bed. I could hear the sterile snap of latex gloves being pulled onto his hands. I channeled all my fear and rage into my left index finger. It felt like trying to move a mountain. The muscles trembled, fighting against the heavy sedation that still lingered in my system. "Come on," I commanded myself. "Move!" Dr. Aris adjusted the intravenous line near my right arm. "I will start the sedative now," he announced softly. "It will take about 60 seconds to take full effect before I remove the breathing tube." With a sudden agonizing burst of adrenaline, my left finger twitched. It curled inward, pressing hard against the side button of the shattered watch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I felt the tiny, distinct haptic vibration against my wrist, confirming the signal had been transmitted. The emergency beacon was live, but would help arrive in time. Brenda let out a theatrical sniffle. "Goodbye, my sweet girl," she whispered, leaning close to my ear. Her perfume smelled like expensive lies and greed. "Do not worry about a thing. Mommy will take very good care of your money." The doctor uncapped the syringe. I braced myself for the cold rush of drugs entering my bloodstream. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit did not just open, they violently burst apart. The crash of metal hitting the walls startled everyone in the room. "Stop what you are doing right now and step away from my client," a fierce, commanding voice echoed through the room. It was Tara, my best friend and the most ruthless attorney in the city. I heard the chaotic scuffle of heavy boots rushing into the room. Hospital security guards fanned out instantly, surrounding my bed. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda shrieked, dropping her fake grieving mother act and adopting her shrill country club outrage. "This is a private family moment. We are saying goodbye to my daughter. Get out." Tara scoffed loudly, her heels clicking sharply as she marched right up to the doctor. "Put that syringe down, Dr. Eris, before I have you arrested for attempted murder. Security, escort him away from the bed." "You have no jurisdiction here," Brittany yelled, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "We are her immediate family. My mother is making the medical decisions. She is brain dead." Tara let out a dark, sharp laugh that cut through the tension. "Really, Brittany? Because according to this legally binding medical proxy, your mother has absolutely zero rights to make any decisions regarding Kelsey's health, finances, or estate." Tara slapped a thick stack of documents directly onto Brenda's chest, forcing my mother to grab them before they hit the floor. I legally stripped you and Richard of all parental and medical rights 5 years ago. Tara announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Kelsey came to my office the day she discovered you had secretly opened 5 different credit cards in her name, ruining her credit to fund your country club memberships. She filed a sweeping exclusion order. You have no authority to authorize a terminal weaning process. You have no authority to claim her life insurance. And you certainly have no authority to pull the plug on my best friend. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear Brenda's rapid, shallow breathing as she scanned the legal documents. The jig was up. Tara had caught them red-handed. "This is absurd," Brenda sputtered, her voice trembling with panic as she realized the security guards were watching her every move. "I am her mother. I love her. We were just following the doctor's advice. We thought she was suffering." Dr. Aris immediately backed away, his tone shifting into cowardice. "I was acting on the family's directives. I was told they held the proxy." "You will be hearing from the medical board," Tara snapped at him before turning her attention back to Brenda and Brittany. "I am having Kelsey transferred to a secure private recovery wing immediately. Neither of you are allowed within 50 feet of her room without my express written permission. If you try to interfere with her medical care again, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing and identity theft." Caught completely off guard and facing the presence of armed security guards, Brenda did what narcissists always do when cornered. She pivoted. Instantly, the cold, calculating woman vanished. Brenda let out a loud, wailing sob, covering her face with her hands. "Oh, thank God," she cried out, her voice dripping with fake relief. "Thank God you brought this to our attention, Tara. I was so blinded by grief I did not know what I was doing. I just wanted my baby to be at peace. We love her so much." Brittany quickly caught on to the performance. She started crying too, grabbing Brenda's arm. "It has been so hard, Tara. We have been so devastated by the accident. We just wanted what was best for her." Their sheer audacity disgusted me. They were acting like devoted victims, completely ignoring the fact that they had just been plotting to use my death to buy a Porsche and save a bankrupt contracting business. Lying in that bed, I realized something crucial. If I simply woke up now and kicked them out, they would just scurry away and find another way to ruin my life or drain my assets. They would play the victims to the rest of the family and society. I needed to trap them. I needed them to put their crimes on public record. I needed to destroy them so thoroughly they could never recover. It was time to wake up, but I was not going to give them the satisfaction of facing the smart, capable cybersecurity auditor they despised. I was going to give them exactly what they thought they wanted: a vulnerable, easily manipulated victim. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my lungs to work against the ventilator. I squeezed my eyes shut tight and then slowly, dramatically let them flutter open. The harsh fluorescent lights burned my retinas, but I kept my gaze unfocused. I let a soft, confused groan escape my lips around the plastic tube. The entire room froze. Kelsey Tara gasped, rushing to my side and taking my hand. Her grip was warm and fiercely protective. "Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I squeezed it gently. Then I looked past Tara, staring directly at Brenda and Brittany, who were standing frozen in shock like deer caught in headlights. I blinked slowly, letting my face relax into an expression of absolute childlike bewilderment. I looked at the two women who had just tried to end my life and delivered my opening line. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice raspy and weak. The retrograde amnesia act was flawless. Brenda's panicked expression instantly melted away, replaced by a slow, predatory smirk. The game was on. Brenda stepped forward, pushing past the security guards with a sudden surge of maternal authority. The panic that had gripped her features just moments before vanished entirely. In its place was the terrifying, practiced warmth of a woman who realized she had just been handed a blank check. She reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it with a possessive tightness that made my shattered wrist throb. "I am your mother, sweetie," she cooed, pitching her voice an octave higher to sound soothing. "You were in a terrible accident, but you are safe now. Mommy is right here, and I am going to take care of everything." I kept my face perfectly blank, staring at her as if she were a complete stranger. Inside, my mind was racing, calculating every possible angle. If I let them think my brain was scrambled, I could strip away their defenses. Narcissists rely on their victims remembering the abuse. Take away the memory, and they instantly assume they have a clean slate to build a brand new prison. Brittany let out a sharp laugh from the foot of the bed. She crossed her arms over her designer coat and rolled her eyes. Well, looks like hitting that steering wheel finally knocked some sense into her. Maybe now she will actually listen to us instead of acting like she is the smartest person in the room. Just our luck, though. We get stuck playing nurse to a grown woman who probably does not even remember her own bank passwords. Her greed was so transparent it was almost comical. She was not relieved that her sister was alive. She was annoyed that my survival meant a delay in her med spa funding. Tara stood frozen on the other side of my bed, her sharp legal mind clearly struggling to process my sudden amnesia. I knew Tara wanted to intervene, wanted to throw them out, but she was watching me closely. I gave her a microscopic fraction of a wink, just a tiny deliberate flutter of my left eyelid hidden from my mother's view. Tara caught it. Her posture relaxed infinitesimally, and she took a step back, allowing the scene to play out. Before Brenda could spin another web of lies, the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit slammed open again. Jamal sprinted into the room, completely out of breath. He was wearing his work clothes, a tailored suit covered in dust from a construction site inspection. His face was pale with genuine terror. He pushed past the remaining security guards and shoved his way right through Brittany, almost knocking her over. "Kelsey," he gasped, gripping the metal bed rail. His eyes scanned the monitors, the tubes, the bandages covering my body. "Oh my God. The hospital called me from your emergency contact list. They said they could not reach Brenda or Brittany. I drove straight from the site. Are you okay? What do the doctors say?" "Watch my shoes!" Brittany shrieked, slapping at his arm. She aggressively dusted off her pristine white coat, glaring at him as if he had just tracked mud into a luxury boutique. "You are making a massive scene in front of everyone. And you just wrinkled a $3,000 coat that I literally bought yesterday." Jamal slowly turned to look at his wife, his expression caught between absolute exhaustion and deep disgust. "Your sister is lying in a hospital bed covered in bruises, and you are screaming about a coat. A coat you bought using my credit card, by the way. I have been working 80-hour weeks drafting blueprints to keep this family afloat, and you cannot even answer your phone when the hospital calls to tell you your sister might die." I watched the exchange with intense focus. Jamal was at his breaking point. He was a brilliant architect, a man who had built a solid career and maintained a perfect credit score until he married into my family. Now he was nothing but a financial beast of burden for a woman who viewed him as an unlimited ATM. This was exactly the leverage I needed. If I was going to dismantle my family's financial crimes, I needed someone on the inside who had access to their daily routines. Jamal was the perfect ally. I let out a soft, whimpering sound, pulling the thin hospital blanket up to my chin. "Who is he?" I asked, trembling slightly. "Why is everyone yelling?" "I do not like the yelling." Brenda immediately seized the opportunity. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders, playing the fierce protector for the nurses who had gathered at the door. "See what you are doing, Jamal. You are frightening her. My poor daughter has suffered severe brain trauma. She is confused and terrified. She needs a calm, stable environment, not your aggressive outbursts." Brenda turned her attention to the hospital administrator who had just arrived to defuse the situation. "Listen to me," Brenda commanded, her voice echoing with upper-class entitlement. "That legal proxy this lawyer brought in here is completely irrelevant now. My daughter clearly lacks the mental capacity to make her own decisions. She does not know her own sister. She does not know her brother-in-law. I am her biological mother, and I am taking over her primary care immediately. She will not be staying in this hospital a moment longer than necessary." Tara stepped forward, her lawyer instincts flaring. "You cannot just discharge a trauma patient into your custody, Mrs. Anderson. She needs professional neurological observation. She will get the best observation money can buy." Brenda shot back smoothly. I am taking her home to our family estate. We have the space, the resources, and the dedication to rehabilitate her. I will hire private nurses. But she needs to be with her family. If you try to stop me, I will file a lawsuit against this hospital for denying a mother access to her mentally incapacitated child. Tara looked at me, waiting for my cue. This was the critical moment. Going back to that sprawling, heavily mortgaged mansion was dangerous. It was a controlled environment where Brenda ruled with an iron fist. They would try to isolate me, drug me, or force me to sign away my assets. But it was also the only place where I could physically access Richard's dual accounting ledgers and Brittany's financial records. It was the belly of the beast. I forced tears into my eyes and let them spill over my cheeks. I grabbed Brenda's sleeve, clutching the expensive fabric like a frightened child. "Please," I cried, my voice shaking with perfectly manufactured panic. "Please do not leave me here with these strangers. I want to go home. I want my mom. I want to go home with my family." Brenda stroked my hair, a victorious gleam shining in her eyes. She looked at Tara with a smug, triumphant smile. "You heard her," Brenda said softly. "She wants her mother. The matter is settled. Arrange the discharge papers immediately." As the nurses began preparing the transport chair, Brittany leaned against the wall, typing furiously on her phone, probably updating her country club friends about her new burden. Jamal stood in the corner watching the entire spectacle with a defeated posture. He looked at me with profound sadness, completely unaware that the frightened, helpless woman in the bed was already calculating exactly how to burn their entire empire to the ground. I let the nurses lift me into the wheelchair, keeping my eyes downcast. I was stepping directly into the lion's den, but the lions had no idea they had just invited the hunter inside. The drive to the sprawling suburban estate was suffocating. I sat in the back seat of Brenda leased Mercedes, staring out the window with wide, vacant eyes. The massive iron gates of my parents' property swung open, revealing the enormous stone mansion that had always felt more like a museum than a home. The manicured lawns screamed generational wealth, but I knew the truth. My cybersecurity audits had already shown me the cracks in their facade long before the car accident. The estate was drowning in second mortgages and predatory loans. They were desperate for cash, and my supposed brain damage was their winning lottery ticket. Brenda parked and instantly assumed her suffocating caregiver routine. She gripped my arm far too tightly as she guided me up the sweeping marble staircase to my old childhood bedroom. The room remained unchanged since they kicked me out years ago. Pale pink walls and a profound sense of isolation. "Sit down, sweetheart," Brenda instructed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You need absolute peace and quiet to let your poor brain heal." The doctors were very clear about reducing stimulation. Before I could react, she reached into my duffel bag. Tara had packed my essential belongings, including my backup smartphone and my work laptop. Brenda snatched them up with alarming speed. She clutched the devices like gold bars. "What are you doing?" I asked, letting my voice waver with manufactured confusion. "I need to call my friends. I need to check my emails." "Oh no, sweetie," Brenda cooed, backing toward the bedroom door. "Screens are terrible for neurological trauma. The blue light will only give you terrible migraines. Mommy is going to keep these safe downstairs. You just focus on resting your mind. We do not want you stressing over silly little computer things." She ran out, locking the door with a heavy metallic click. I stood alone in the center of the pink room. My devices were gone. I was entirely cut off from the outside world. But a cold smile spread across my face. Brenda thought she had just severed my connection to my assets. She had no idea that my entire digital empire was secured behind biometric firewalls she could never crack. 2 hours later, the lock clicked again. This time it was my father Richard who stepped into the room. He carried a silver tray with a glass of water and a thick stack of stapled papers. Richard was the silent enabler, letting Brenda scream while he handled financial maneuvering. He looked at me with a practiced expression of paternal concern, but his eyes darted. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" he asked, setting the tray down on my bedside table. "Your mother says you are having trouble remembering things." "My head hurts," I lied, sinking back against the pillows. Everything is so blurry. Why am I here? You had a bad accident, Richard said smoothly, handing me a sleek black pen. But you are home now, and we are going to take care of everything. I just need you to sign these hospital release forms. The insurance company is being difficult about your intensive care bills. If you just sign on the dotted lines, I can get the accountants to handle the messy details. You will not have to worry about a single thing. He pushed the stack of papers onto my lap. I picked them up, letting my hands tremble slightly. To the untrained eye, the front page looked exactly like standard hospital billing consent forms. The logo of the medical center was even printed at the top. But I spent my life reading the microscopic fine print of digital privacy contracts and corporate audits. I knew exactly what to look for. I slid my thumb down the edge of the pages, lifting the second sheet just enough to catch the legal jargon buried in the middle paragraphs. It was not a hospital release. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney. The clauses were sweeping and ruthless. By signing this document, I would be granting Richard and Brenda immediate and irrevocable access to all my bank accounts, my investment portfolios, and my physical properties. It gave them the right to liquidate my assets, authorize wire transfers, and sell my business holdings without my presence or verbal consent. They had specifically written the document to bypass the medical proxy Tara had thrown in their faces at the hospital. If I signed this, my mother would own me completely. You need to sign right there at the bottom, Richard urged, tapping the paper impatiently. The notary is waiting downstairs in the kitchen. We need to get this filed before the banks close for the weekend. I looked up at him, batting my eyelashes in pure, innocent confusion. Okay, Daddy, I whispered. If you say it will help. I ignored the pen he offered me. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my oversized hospital cardigan. Before leaving the intensive care unit, I had quietly swiped a specific pen from Tara's open briefcase. Tara notoriously used novelty disappearing ink pens to mark up rough drafts of legal contracts before shredding them. It was a quirky habit of hers, but right now it was my ultimate weapon. I uncapped the pen and pressed it against the heavy legal paper. I carefully signed my full name on every single signature line Richard pointed to. My handwriting was shaky, perfectly matching the profile of a brain-damaged victim. Richard snatched the documents up the second I finished the last signature. He did not even bother to say goodbye or ask if I needed anything else. He just turned on his heel and practically sprinted down the hallway to get the fraudulent papers notarized. I sat quietly on the bed, listening to his footsteps echoing down the marble staircase. The trap was set. They were probably celebrating in the kitchen, opening champagne, and dreaming about the millions they were about to drain from my accounts. Jamal stared at me, his jaw slack, his eyes darting frantically between the bottle of sparkling water in my hand and the terrifyingly calm expression on my face. For a long, agonizing second, the only sound in the cavernous kitchen was the low hum of the smart refrigerator. He blinked hard, shaking his head, as if trying to clear a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. Kelsey, he whispered, his voice cracking. What is going on? You did not even know your own name at the hospital. Brenda said the doctors told her your cerebral cortex was completely inflamed. Brenda lies. Every time she exhales, I replied, leaning against the cool granite counter. I did not cross my arms, keeping my injured wrist safely resting against my side, but my posture projected absolute authority. I remember everything, Jamal. I remember the crash. I remember waking up in the intensive care unit and listening to my mother and my sister calculate the exact dollar amount of my life insurance payout. They were scheduling a terminal weaning to kill me before you got off work. I faked the amnesia to get out of that hospital bed alive and to get back inside this house. Jamal gripped the edge of the kitchen island, his knuckles turning white. He looked physically ill. They were going to pull the plug on you, to pay off the house. To fund Brittany's med spa and bail out Richard's contracting business, I corrected him, taking another sip of water. I heard the whole argument, Jamal. I know about the forged commercial loans. I know Richard is using your pristine credit score and your architectural license to secure massive lines of credit. He is uploading fake structural assessments. If those buildings fail, or if the bank audits the accounts, you are the one who goes down for federal wire fraud. They are building their golden parachutes using your social security number. He let out a ragged breath, a sound that carried years of suppressed exhaustion and quiet desperation. I tried to freeze the accounts tonight, he confessed, his voice barely a rasp. Brittany went completely ballistic. She told me my credit belongs to this family. She threatened to make my life a living hell if I did not unlock the funds by morning. I am trapped, Kelsey. I went to the police station twice last week and sat in my car in the parking lot. But if I turn Richard in, Brittany will file for divorce and claim I hid assets. With her family's lawyers, they will bankrupt me before I ever see the inside of a courtroom. I have $80,000 in student loan debt and they have drained every cent of my savings. I have nothing left to fight them with. You have me, I stated flatly. Jamal let out a humorless, bitter laugh. Kelsey, you are trapped in the guest room. Your mother confiscated your phone and your laptop. Richard just had you sign a sweeping financial power of attorney. They own your estate now, too. By tomorrow morning, they are going to liquidate your corporate stock. I smiled a slow, predatory grin that made Jamal stop laughing instantly. Let them try, I said. That power of attorney Richard practically sprinted downstairs to get notarized was signed using a novelty disappearing ink pen I took from my lawyer's briefcase. By tomorrow morning, the signature lines will be completely blank. The document is legally void. And as for my digital assets, Brenda thinks confiscating my laptop stops me. She does not realize my entire network is secured behind military-grade biometric firewalls. They cannot access a single penny. Jamal stared at me, a spark of genuine hope igniting in his exhausted eyes. You planned this. You walked right into their trap on purpose. I did not just walk into it, I countered. I am going to rewire it and lock them inside. Brenda has spent her entire life treating me like a defective product because I preferred coding over country club luncheons. Richard treated me like a tax write-off. They looked at you, Jamal, and saw a workhorse, a disposable asset with a good credit score. But I cannot do this alone. I am physically compromised, and I need access to Richard's internal network. I need you to be my hands, Jamal. We are going to execute a coordinated financial strike. By the time I am done, Richard will be facing federal embezzlement charges, Brenda will be destitute, and Brittany will have to learn what it actually feels like to work for a living. Jamal stood up a little straighter. The defeated slump in his shoulders vanished entirely, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a man who builds skyscrapers from the ground up. What do you need me to do? First, I need my devices back, I instructed. Where did Brenda hide them? The wall safe in Richard's study, Jamal answered immediately. I know the combination. Richard makes me deposit my own physical paychecks in there so he can control the cash flow for the household expenses. It is a pathetic power play. I can get your laptop and your phone right now. Go, I said. Bring them to my room. And Jamal, make sure you grab Richard's backup hard drive. I know he keeps a physical ledger of his shadow accounts in that safe. He does not trust the cloud. Jamal nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Give me 5 minutes. I slipped back up the servant stairs, navigating the creaky floorboards with practiced ease. The adrenaline masked the throbbing pain in my ribs. I settled back into the hospital bed, pulling the thin pink covers over my legs, and arranged my features into the vacant expression of a brain-damaged victim, just in case someone walked in. Exactly 5 minutes later, the lock clicked softly. Jamal slipped into the room, handing me my sleek silver laptop, my smartphone, and a heavy external hard drive wrapped in black rubber casing. He had also brought a small flashlight and a heavily encrypted USB flash drive. I booted up the laptop, keeping the screen brightness turned down to the lowest possible setting. The familiar glow illuminated the dark room. I bypassed the standard login screen, tapping a specific sequence of keys to trigger the biometric scanner hidden beneath the trackpad. It scanned my thumbprint, and the screen instantly unlocked, revealing my custom command terminal. I connected Richard's external hard drive. The screen flashed a warning about unauthorized encryption. I cracked my knuckles, taking a deep breath. Richard thinks he is a mastermind, Jamal whispered, standing over my shoulder. He layered 3 different passwords on that drive. Richard uses the founding date of his company, followed by Brittany's birth year, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard with blistering speed. He is predictable. Narcissists always use passwords that celebrate their own ego. Within 30 seconds, the encryption firewall shattered. The file directory for Richard's fraudulent empire exploded onto my screen. There were dozens of subfolders meticulously labeled. Shell companies, fake material invoices, offshore accounts, and a massive folder dedicated entirely to lines of credit opened under Jamal's name. "Look at this," I murmured, highlighting a specific spreadsheet. "He has been taking out commercial loans for properties that do not even exist. He drafted fake zoning permits and forged your signature as the lead architect to secure the funding. He has stolen over $3 million in your name alone, Jamal." Jamal gripped the back of my chair, his breathing ragged. "Can you download it?" "All of it." "I am not just downloading it," I said, a dark satisfaction coloring my voice. "I am mirroring it directly to an encrypted offshore server controlled by my legal team. By tomorrow morning, my lawyer Tara will have an undeniable ironclad digital footprint of every felony your father-in-law has committed over the last 10 years. But we are not going to the police yet." Jamal frowned, looking down at me. "Why not? We have the proof. We can end this right now." "Because simply sending them to jail is too easy," I explained, turning away from the screen to look at him. "If we call the authorities tomorrow, Brenda will play the victim. She will claim Richard acted alone. Brittany will divorce you and play the ignorant housewife. They will manipulate the narrative and hide the remaining money. If we want true justice, we have to expose them publicly. We have to let them think they have won right up until the moment they realize they have lost everything." A slow smile spread across Jamal's face, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in years. "What is the next step?" "Tomorrow morning," I said, closing the laptop and handing it back to him to hide in the safe. "Richard is going to realize those power of attorney forms are blank. He is going to panic. Brenda is going to try to force me to sign another batch. You are going to go to work exactly like normal. Do not change your routine. Let them feel powerful. Because tomorrow night, we are hosting a family dinner. And I am going to serve them a reality check they will never recover from." Jamal stumbled backward until his spine hit the stainless steel refrigerator. The ice dispenser rattled behind him. He stared at me as if a ghost had just crawled out of the marble flooring. "You are faking," he breathed the words, barely making it past his lips. "You do not have brain damage." "I have a mild concussion and 3 fractured ribs," I corrected him, keeping my voice at a low, steady murmur. "But my cerebral cortex is perfectly intact. I know exactly who I am. I am Kelsey Anderson. I know you are Jamal Davis. I know you married my sister 4 years ago in a ridiculously overpriced ceremony in Nantucket that Richard forced you to take out a personal loan to cover. And I know your wife just snapped your credit card in half because you finally realized she is bleeding you dry." Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the kitchen doorway. He ran a trembling hand over his face. "Why are you doing this, Kelsey? Why pretend you do not know us? Why let Brenda drag you back to this house? Because if I woke up in that hospital bed and told the doctors I was fine, Brenda would have smiled, played the relieved mother, and found another way to ruin me," I said, taking a step closer. "Jamal, you need to listen to me very carefully. You think financial fraud is the worst thing happening in this family right now. It is not. Do you know why Brenda and Brittany were so eager to get my medical proxy before you arrived at the hospital?" He shook his head slowly, the dread already pooling in his eyes. "I have a $3 million life insurance policy through my firm," I explained, letting the cold, hard numbers hang in the air. "Brenda is the primary beneficiary." I was fully conscious but paralyzed from the sedatives when they stood over my bed. I listened to my own mother tell a bribed doctor to fast-track my terminal weaning. I listened to Brittany complain that I should hurry up and die so she could fund her vanity med spa. They were scheduling my murder, Jamal. They were going to pull the plug to save this bankrupt house and buy designer clothes. Jamal physically recoiled. His hand flew to his mouth to stifle a gasp. "No," he choked out. "No, Kelsey, that is insane. Brenda is controlling and Brittany is spoiled, but they are not killers. They are your family. She is my wife." "Your wife just told you her family needs your money more than you need your freedom," I reminded him brutally. "She just told you to ignore federal wire fraud. Do you really think she would hesitate to cash out my life insurance? Do you think she will hesitate to throw you under the bus when the FBI comes knocking for those forged construction loans? You saw the ledgers, Jamal. You saw your forged signature. You are the fall guy. When this house of cards collapses, Richard will claim he was just a confused old contractor, and Brittany will claim she was just an innocent housewife. You are the architect on record. You go to federal prison. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently as if he could dislodge the truth. The denial was thick, but the architect in him, the man who calculated loads and structural integrity, could see the math. The math did not lie. He slowly opened his eyes, and the last shred of his naive loyalty to my sister was gone. It was replaced by the cold, terrified realization of a man staring at a locked cage. "What do we do?" he whispered, his voice defeated. "I cannot just walk away. They have my name on everything." "We do not walk away," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "We trap them. I am going to build a digital cage so tight they will never see a courtroom, let alone a country club, ever again. But I cannot do it with Brenda hovering over me and my devices locked in Richard's safe. I need access to the outside world. I need to contact Tara and my security team at the firm." Jamal frowned, glancing toward the hallway. "Brenda took your laptop. She said the blue light was bad for your brain. She is keeping it locked up." "I do not want my laptop," I said. "Brenda thinks she is smart, but she is sloppy. If she gets suspicious, she will hire some overpriced tech guy to sweep my machine. I cannot risk her intercepting my communications. I need a clean device, something entirely off their radar, something that does not touch this house's network." Jamal rubbed his temples, his mind shifting from panic to problem-solving. "I cannot buy a new laptop without Brittany seeing the bank alert. She tracks all the shared accounts like a hawk." "I do not need a new one," I pressed. "You are a commercial architect, Jamal. You do not just use paper blueprints anymore." He paused, realization dawning on his exhausted face. "My backup rendering tablet. I keep it in the trunk of my car for site visits. It has a physical keyboard attachment and enough processing power to run heavy software. It is completely clean." "Does it have cellular data?" I asked. "No, but I have an encrypted mobile hotspot device the firm issued me for secure client presentations," Jamal replied. "It uses a private network. It never touches public or residential lines." "Perfect." I breathed, a genuine thrill of anticipation running through my veins. "Brenda thinks I am a drooling vegetable. She will not be looking for a high-tech command center in my bed sheets. I need that tablet and the hotspot, Jamal. If she catches you with it, she will know you are faking." He warned, his eyes filled with anxiety. "She will realize I helped you. She will destroy me, Kelsey." "She is already destroying you," I countered fiercely. "This is how you survive. Bring it to my room tomorrow morning." He looked at the broken credit card on the floor, then up at me. He gave a single sharp nod. I slipped out of the kitchen as silently as a ghost, making my way back up the creaking stairs and sliding into my hospital bed just as the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3. I pulled the pink comforter up to my chin, staring at the dark ceiling. The adrenaline was a warm hum in my chest. The sun rose, casting a harsh, bright light across the bedroom. Brenda threw the door open at exactly 8 o'clock, carrying a tray of bland oatmeal and playing the role of the devoted, tragic mother. She fluffed my pillows, cooing to me, as I stared blankly at the wall, letting a bit of drool escape the corner of my mouth. "Look who is here to see you, sweetie," Brenda chirped, stepping aside. Jamal walked into the room, dressed in a sharp suit, carrying his heavy leather messenger bag. He looked nervous, but he held it together. He walked over to the bed, offering a sad, tight smile. "Hey, Kelsey," he said softly, playing his part beautifully. "I have to go to the site. Just wanted to see how you were doing." I blinked slowly, offering no recognition. He leaned over to give me a gentle, awkward hug. As his body shielded me from Brenda's line of sight, he smoothly unzipped the side pocket of his messenger bag. A heavy, flat object wrapped in a dark gray microfiber sleeve slid silently beneath the thick layers of my blankets. A tiny black rectangular hotspot followed it, nestling against my hip. "Get well soon," he whispered, stepping back. He turned to Brenda. "I will be late tonight. Big pour at the downtown site. Do not worry about us. Brenda sighed, waving him off. I have everything under control here. Jamal walked out the heavy door, clicking shut behind him. Brenda spent another 10 minutes fixing the curtains and talking to herself about Brittany's upcoming expenses before finally leaving to yell at the landscapers. The moment the lock clicked, I threw the blankets back. I pulled the tablet and the hotspot from the microfiber sleeve. The black screen reflected my determined face. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated the dark room with a brilliant white light. The hunter was finally armed. The tablet booted up silently in my hands. I bypassed the standard architectural interface and opened a hidden terminal window. My fingers moved awkwardly at first, adjusting to the flat digital keyboard instead of my mechanical setup, but muscle memory quickly took over. I connected to Jamal's encrypted mobile hotspot. The signal was robust and completely untethered from Richard's residential network. Brenda could monitor the Wi-Fi router downstairs all she wanted. I was a ghost. I routed my connection through a series of offshore proxies, bouncing my signal from Iceland to Switzerland, before finally pinging my firm's private mainframe. I had set up this specific backdoor access months ago, anticipating that one day my corporate rivals might try to lock me out of my own servers. I never imagined I would be using it to wage war against my own mother and sister. The firewalls recognized my encrypted handshake and parted instantly. I had full administrative access to my forensic tracking software. My ribs throbbed, a sharp reminder of my physical vulnerability, but I ignored the pain. I needed to see the entire battlefield before I launched my first strike. I started with the architect of my misery, Richard. Jamal had already shown me the forged commercial loans, but I needed to understand the bedrock of Richard's contracting empire. I deployed a packet sniffer algorithm to crawl through public tax filings, real estate metadata, and bank routing numbers associated with Richard's social security number and corporate tax ID. The program was designed to track digital money trails that human accountants usually missed. I sat back against my pillows, pulling the pink comforter up over the glowing screen to shield the light, and watched the progress bars fill. The results populated 10 minutes later, and they were breathtakingly catastrophic. Richard was not just a failing businessman, cutting corners to keep up appearances. He was running a textbook dual accounting scheme. One set of books, the ones he showed the banks and potential investors, painted a picture of a struggling but viable company dealing with temporary operating losses. The second set of books, hidden deep within nested shell companies, revealed the truth. Richard was hemorrhaging cash. He had been systematically dodging corporate taxes for the past 7 years. He classified personal luxury expenses like Brenda's designer wardrobes, their country club memberships, and their frequent vacations to Europe as tax-deductible business materials. He funneled legitimate revenue into offshore dummy corporations to hide it from the government. The algorithm aggregated the final deficit and highlighted it in red. Richard owed the Internal Revenue Service over $4 million in back taxes, penalties, and accumulated interest. A cold, dark laugh escaped my throat. The federal government does not send polite collection letters for $4 million. They seize assets, freeze accounts, and send people to federal prison. Richard was cornered. That was why he and Brenda were so utterly desperate to secure my medical proxy and force me to sign that sweeping financial power of attorney. My $3 million life insurance payout was not just going to fund their lifestyle. My death was supposed to be their salvation. I was going to be the sacrificial lamb offered up to the IRS, so Richard could stay out of a federal penitentiary. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. I took a deep breath, closing Richard's file and opening a new search protocol. It was time to look at my perfect sister. Brittany had always demanded the absolute finest things in life. Her salary as a hospital administrator barely covered her monthly shoe budget. She relied entirely on Jamal. Jamal was killing himself, working 80-hour weeks, sleeping on dusty construction sites to keep his wife wrapped in designer silk. But last night in the kitchen, Brittany had been utterly terrified when Jamal froze their accounts. She screamed that her parents needed the money, but Richard's debt was $4 million. Brittany's credit card limit could not put a dent in that kind of federal deficit. Brittany was hiding something else. I initiated a targeted forensic trace on the joint bank accounts Jamal shared with my sister. I isolated Brittany's personal spending habits over the last 24 months. The usual suspects populated the screen immediately: high-end boutiques, luxury car leases, fine dining, daily spa treatments. But then the tracking algorithm flagged a massive, glaring anomaly. Every single month on the first day of the month, exactly $15,000 left. Jamal's hard-earned savings and vanished into a private blind escrow account. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Brittany was bleeding $15,000 a month in pure cash. I ran a decryption script on the escrow routing number. It took less than 3 minutes to crack the veil. The funds were not going to a debt collector or a secret investment portfolio. They were being deposited directly to a premier luxury real estate management firm located in downtown Boston. Brittany was paying the lease on a penthouse condominium. I quickly pulled the public utility records and the lease agreement registered for that specific downtown property. I cross-referenced the names expecting to see Brittany trying to hide a secret property from Jamal. But the lease was not in her name. It was registered to a man, Dr. Vance Sterling. I opened a new tab and ran a background check on Vance Sterling. His professional profile loaded instantly. He was the chief of plastic surgery at the exact same prestigious hospital where Brittany worked as a senior administrator. He was 10 years older than her, sporting a silver fox aesthetic and an arrogant, practiced smile. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling Dr. Sterling's public financial records and court filings. The picture became crystal clear in seconds. Vance Sterling was currently navigating a vicious, highly publicized divorce. A family court judge had completely frozen his assets pending a brutal settlement. The wealthy, arrogant surgeon could not afford his own luxury lifestyle right now. He was legally broke. The final puzzle piece locked into place, hitting me with the force of a freight train. Brittany was not just a spoiled, entitled wife draining her husband's bank accounts to buy expensive clothes or bail out her criminal father. She was having a wildly expensive affair with her boss. She was literally taking the money Jamal earned by breaking his back on construction sites and using it to pay for a $15,000 a month downtown penthouse where she was sleeping with another man. She was financing her own infidelity with her husband's sweat and blood. It was a level of betrayal so profound, so utterly sociopathic, that it made the air in my lungs turn to ice. Jamal had hesitated in the kitchen last night. He was terrified of destroying his marriage, hoping he could somehow salvage the life he had built. He thought his wife was just selfish and financially irresponsible. He had absolutely no idea he was funding her secret second life. I stared at the glowing screen, the ultimate weapon now resting securely in my hands. Jamal wanted to save his marriage. This discovery would not just end his marriage, it was going to turn the hardworking architect into my most ruthless and devastating ally. The evening sun cast long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor of my bedroom when the heavy front door finally echoed through the estate. Jamal was home. I listened intently as his heavy footsteps moved through the foyer. He bypassed the kitchen, ignored the grand staircase, and took the servant stairs exactly as we had planned. He slipped into my room looking like a man walking to the gallows. His tie was loosened, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his 80-hour work week, and his eyes were bloodshot. Before he could utter a single word, I snatched the television remote from the nightstand and cranked the volume. The overly dramatic dialogue of an evening soap opera blasted through the speakers, filling the room with artificial screaming and crying. It was the perfect acoustic camouflage. I patted the edge of my mattress, signaling for him to sit. He dropped his messenger bag on the floor and sank onto the bed, exhaling a long, ragged breath. He looked at me, his expression desperate for some kind of reassurance. "Did you find a way to untangle my name from Richard's loans?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the blaring television. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I pulled his architectural tablet from beneath my pink blankets. The screen was already awake, glowing with the harsh, undeniable light of reality. I had spent the entire day tracing the financial arteries of my family's corruption, but what I had found was far worse than corporate embezzlement. I looked at Jamal, feeling a brief, sharp pang of sympathy. He was a good man trapped in a den of vipers. He thought he was fighting a financial war. He had no idea his own wife had already slit his throat. "I need you to look at this," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. Sparing his feelings right now would only get us both killed. I handed him the tablet. On the screen was a crisp, high-definition video file. I pressed play. "What is this?" Jamal asked, squinting at the footage. "It looks like a building lobby." "It is the lobby of a luxury high-rise condominium in downtown Boston," I explained, watching his face closely. My lawyer, Tara, hired a private investigator the moment I triggered the data dump this morning. The investigator pulled public utility records and cross-referenced them with the property management firm. Then he legally requested the lobby security footage under the guise of an insurance audit. Look at the timestamp. Jamal's eyes tracked to the bottom right corner of the screen. The footage was from yesterday afternoon, right around the time he had been standing in the pouring rain, supervising a concrete pour for Richard's failing business. A woman walked through the revolving glass doors on the screen. She was wearing a tailored beige trench coat, carrying a designer handbag, and moving with an air of absolute entitlement. Jamal stopped breathing. The color drained from his face instantly. It was Brittany. He watched utterly paralyzed as a tall, silver-haired man in a custom-fit suit stepped out of the private elevator bank to greet her. The man was Dr. Vance Sterling. He did not shake Brittany's hand. He did not offer a polite, professional greeting. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her flush against his chest, and kissed her deeply. Brittany melted into the embrace, her hands tangling in his hair, smiling brightly as he whispered something in her ear. He handed her a shiny silver keycard, and together they walked back into the private elevator. Jamal stared at the frozen final frame of the video. The silence emanating from him was deafening. The blaring television behind us faded into background noise. "That is Vance Sterling," I stated, delivering the final crushing blow. "He is the chief of plastic surgery at Brittany's hospital. He is currently going through a vicious divorce, and a family court judge has frozen all of his assets. He cannot afford his own luxury lifestyle right now, so your wife is paying for it." Jamal's hands began to shake. The tablet rattled against his knees. I tracked the blind escrow account Brittany uses to hide the transactions. I continued ensuring every word landed with absolute precision. "She is wiring $15,000 a month from your joint savings account to pay the lease on that penthouse. You have been working 80-hour weeks, ruining your health and destroying your credit score to fund her luxury affair. She is using your sweat and blood to buy another man's affection." I waited for the denial. I waited for him to throw the tablet, to scream, to bury his face in his hands and weep. But Jamal did none of those things. The devastating grief that had clouded his eyes just moments ago completely evaporated. The hesitation, the lingering loyalty, the desperate desire to save his marriage, it all burned away in a matter of seconds. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were as cold and dead as polished obsidian. "I want to ruin them," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, calculated fury. "I want to take everything." I nodded, taking the tablet from his hands. "We're going to drain the swamp, I promised. Tomorrow morning, you are going to call your bank and execute a hard transfer of whatever liquid cash is left in your personal accounts into a secure, untraceable trust Tara has already established for you. You will legally dissolve your partnership with Richards LLC, immediately revoking your architectural license from all of his active construction sites. The moment you pull your license, city inspectors will shut down his projects." "What about the forged federal loans?" Jamal asked, his mind now operating with ruthless efficiency. "I have already compiled the data packets," I replied, bringing up a new screen on the tablet. "I have Richard's shadow ledgers, the fake blueprints he uploaded, and his actual tax deficit. I am setting a delayed script. The second you are legally detached from his firm, my servers will automatically forward the entire encrypted portfolio to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Regional FBI Field Office. The federal government will freeze Richard's accounts by noon. Brenda will be locked out of her country club, and Brittany will find her credit cards declining at the penthouse door." Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His gaze was locked on the screen, analyzing the financial trap we were building. "We need to time the license revocation perfectly," he murmured, tapping the edge of the tablet. "If I pull it before 9 in the morning, the city clerks will issue the stop work orders before Richard even finishes his coffee." "Exactly," I said, leaning in close. Our heads were practically touching as we whispered over the glowing screen, finalizing the exact minute we would detonate their lives. The blueprint for their destruction was flawless. Then, without a single warning, the heavy brass doorknob of my bedroom clicked loudly. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Brenda stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, staring directly at us, huddled together over a highly advanced piece of technology in the dark. "What the hell is going on in here?" Brenda demanded, her voice cutting through the noise of the television like a serrated blade. Adrenaline spiked through my veins with the force of a physical blow. In a fraction of a second, my survival instincts overrode the throbbing pain in my fractured ribs. I shoved my hands under the pink comforter, grabbing the heavy metal frame of the tablet and sliding it smoothly beneath Jamal's thigh. The microfiber sleeve went with it, entirely concealed by the thick layers of blankets and Jamal's seated weight. Jamal froze perfectly still. His face was already drained of color from witnessing Brittany's sickening betrayal on the screen. He looked up at Brenda with hollow, haunted eyes. His shock was genuine, but Brenda completely misinterpreted the source of his pale, trembling demeanor. Brenda marched across the hardwood floor, her heels striking the ground like hammer blows. She snatched the television remote from the nightstand and slammed her thumb against the power button. The dramatic soap opera died instantly, plunging the room into a heavy, suffocating silence. She crossed her arms, glaring down at Jamal with absolute contempt. "What exactly are you doing, hovering over her in the dark?" Brenda interrogated, her voice dripping with venom. "She is a severely brain-damaged woman, Jamal. She is trying to recover from a catastrophic trauma, and you are sneaking up the servant stairs to interrogate her." "I was not interrogating her." Jamal stammered, his voice hoarse and raw. The betrayal he had just witnessed was still choking him, but he was fighting to keep his composure. "I was just checking on her. I wanted to see how she was doing." "Checking on her?" Brenda scoffed, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You look guilty as sin. You are sweating and you look like you have seen a ghost. Were you trying to ask her about the firm? Were you trying to get her to sign something while she is incapacitated? You know she cannot comprehend a single word you are saying. You are harassing a disabled woman in my house." "I did not ask her for anything," Jamal insisted, his hands curling into tight fists resting on his knees. Brenda did not believe a word of it. She reached into the pocket of her tailored slacks and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen furiously and put it on speakerphone, holding it up like a weapon. The line rang twice before Richard answered, his voice booming through the small speaker. "What is it, Brenda?" he barked, sounding irritated and out of breath. "Your son-in-law is upstairs harassing Kelsey in the dark," she announced, staring daggers at Jamal. "He sneaked into her room. I think he was trying to pressure her about the business or the accounts while she is confused. He is hovering over her bed and upsetting her." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Richard spoke again, his voice was laced with authoritarian menace. "Jamal, you listen to me very carefully," Richard growled, the speakerphone amplifying his rage. "You have absolutely no business being in that room. You are not her medical proxy, and you are not her caretaker. You are a guest in my home. If you do not get away from my daughter and get out of that room right now, I will call the police and have you physically removed for trespassing. Do you understand me?" Jamal stared at the phone, his jaw clenching so hard I could hear his teeth grinding together. He was an architect who had poured years of his life into Richard's company, only to discover he was the designated fall guy for a $4 million federal tax fraud. He had just watched his wife finance a luxury penthouse for her lover using his hard-earned savings. The absolute audacity of Richard threatening him with the police was almost poetic in its cruelty. It was time for me to intervene before Jamal snapped and ruined the entire operation. I let out a high-pitched, piercing wail. I pulled the pink comforter up to my chin, burying the lower half of my face in the fabric. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing tears to spill hot and fast down my cheeks. I began to rock back and forth violently, vibrating the mattress. "Mommy," I screamed, my voice breaking perfectly, pitching the exact tone of a terrified toddler. "Mommy, make them stop yelling. The loud man is scary. Make him go away." I threw my hands over my ears, pressing hard and sobbing openly. I allowed my eyes to go wide and vacant, darting around the room as if I was hallucinating invisible monsters in the corners. I let a string of drool escape the corner of my mouth, smearing into the blanket. It was a humiliating, grotesque performance, but it was the most vital acting job of my life. Brenda's demeanor flipped with terrifying speed. The angry, suspicious interrogator vanished, replaced instantly by the fiercely protective, tragic mother. She shoved Jamal hard in the shoulder, forcing him to stand up and move away from the bed. "Look what you did, you idiot!" she hissed at Jamal before leaning over me. "Oh, my sweet girl," she cooed, smoothing the hair back from my sweaty forehead. "It is okay. Mommy is right here. Nobody is going to yell anymore. The bad man is leaving." Jamal stood beside the bed, his chest heaving. He looked down at me. For a fraction of a second, I dropped the vacant stare and met his eyes with absolute predatory clarity. I gave him a microscopic nod. He understood the assignment perfectly. The lingering loyalty he had felt for this family completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. As Jamal stood, he smoothly dragged his messenger bag closer with his foot. He reached under the edge of the comforter, his large hand swallowing the tablet and the hotspot. In one fluid, seamless motion, he dropped the digital devices into the open leather bag and zipped it shut. Brenda was too busy wiping fake tears from my cheeks to notice the technological heist happening 2 feet away. "I am sorry," Jamal said, his voice flat and entirely devoid of emotion. He was playing the role of the defeated, ashamed husband flawlessly. "I am just stressed about work. The site is a mess. I am not thinking straight. I need to get out of the house and cool off." "Just get out," Brenda snapped, not even turning to look at him. "Do not come back until you learn how to behave around a sick person." Jamal hoisted the heavy leather bag onto his shoulder. He turned on his heel and walked out of the bedroom, his footsteps heavy and measured. A minute later, the heavy thud of the front door closing echoed up the stairwell. He was gone, and my digital weapon was safely smuggled out of enemy territory. I continued to whimper, rocking my head against the pillows. Brenda sat on the edge of the bed, humming a tuneless lullaby and patting my shoulder. 5 minutes later, heavy footsteps pounded up the hallway. Richard appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his face flushed red with anger. He looked around the room, ensuring Jamal was actually gone. "Is he out of the house?" Richard demanded, crossing his arms over his chest. "He left," Brenda confirmed, keeping her hand on my shoulder. I let my eyes glaze over, completely staring blankly at the far wall. I let my mouth hang open, breathing rhythmically, pretending the exhaustion of my panic attack had drained my cognitive functions. I was nothing but a broken doll in a hospital bed. Brenda looked up at Richard. The warm, maternal affection vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, mercenary calculation. She looked at me with absolute disgust, treating me like a piece of malfunctioning machinery that was costing them money. "The financial power of attorney failed," Brenda stated flatly, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She is too far gone, Richard. The bank managers are getting suspicious. They will not accept her signature in this state even if we guide her hand. They require a notary to confirm she is of sound mind." Richard cursed under his breath, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Then how do we get the life insurance policy transferred? We need that capital to cover the offshore deficits before the auditors start asking questions next quarter." Brenda stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her expensive slacks. She looked down at me one last time, her decision finalized. "It is time for the conservatorship," she said. "We bypass her signature entirely. We get a judge to declare her legally and mentally incompetent. We take total control of her estate, her medical directives, and her corporate assets. Call Dr. Evans. Tell him we are ready to proceed with the terminal diagnosis." Dr. Arthur Evans arrived the following morning, reeking of cheap cologne and expensive scotch. He was not a neurologist. He was a retired psychiatrist who spent more time on the golf course with my father than he ever did in a medical clinic. He carried a leather-bound clipboard and wore a practiced expression of solemn medical authority, but his eyes darted around the expensive fixtures of the house with naked greed. I lay completely still in my bed, listening intently, as Brenda intercepted him in the hallway just outside my door. She spoke in hushed, frantic whispers, perfectly playing the role of an exhausted, heartbroken caregiver, driven to the edge by an impossible burden. It has been an absolute nightmare. Arthur, Brenda sighed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. She is completely untethered from reality. Last night she was wandering the hallways at 3 in the morning, screaming at shadows. She does not know where she is. She does not even recognize Richard or me half the time. Richard chimed in his deep voice, adding a layer of authoritative validation to the lie. She has become violent, Arthur. She threw a glass of water at one of the nurses we hired. We had to let the girl go, because Kelsey is just too unpredictable. She cannot even hold a spoon to feed herself anymore. We have to spoon feed her pureed food like an infant. We are terrified she is going to hurt herself or someone else. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the crown molding with my eyes. Every single word spilling from their mouths was a calculated, absolute lie. I had not left this bed. I had not thrown anything. I was perfectly capable of feeding myself. But Brenda and Richard were laying the groundwork for total legal control. They needed a medical professional to sign off on my total mental collapse, and Dr. Evans was clearly here to rubber stamp the execution. I understand completely, Richard. Dr. Evans murmured, his pen scratching against the paper on his clipboard. Brain trauma of this magnitude often results in severe regression and aggressive outbursts. It is a tragedy, but it is very common. I just need to ask her a few standard baseline questions to satisfy the legal requirements for the affidavit. The heavy oak door creaked open. Brenda led Dr. Evans into the room with Richard looming right behind them. The three of them stood at the foot of my bed, staring down at me like vultures circling a dying animal. "Hello, Kelsey," Dr. Evans said, using a slow, exaggerated tone reserved for speaking to a very young child or a severely impaired patient. "Do you know who I am? This was the moment. I had a choice. I could sit up, speak perfectly clear English, and demand they all get out of my house. I could prove my cognitive function right then and there, but if I did that, Brenda would simply claim I was having a momentary lucid phase. They would lock me in this room, take away my phone, and find another doctor to drug me until I actually was a vegetable. More importantly, a private medical evaluation meant nothing in the grand scheme of my revenge. If I fought them now, it remained a private family dispute. But if I let them win this battle, if I allowed them to push for a formal conservatorship, they would be forced to file their claims in a court of law. They would have to submit sworn affidavits detailing my condition and providing a full accounting of my financial estate to a sitting judge. By letting them declare me incompetent, I was forcing them to commit federal perjury on the public record. They would be building their own gallows and eagerly placing the nooses around their own necks. I decided to give them exactly the performance they needed. I shrank back against the headboard, pulling the heavy comforter up over my mouth. I widened my eyes, mimicking absolute terror. I looked at Dr. Evans and then darted my gaze to the corners of the room, shrinking away from invisible threats. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling and high-pitched. "Where is my dog? I want my dog." I had not owned a dog in 15 years. Dr. Evans exchanged a knowing look with Brenda and clicked his pen. "Kelsey, can you tell me what year it is? Can you tell me the name of the president?" I let out a soft, confused whimper. I began twisting the fabric of the blanket around my fingers over and over again, displaying classic signs of severe anxiety and cognitive regression. "It is time for school," I mumbled, rocking my upper body slightly. "The bus is going to leave without me. I lost my backpack. Mommy is going to be mad if I miss the bus." Brenda let out a dramatic, heavy sigh and covered her face with her hands, pretending to weep at the tragic state of her daughter. Richard placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, looking at Dr. Evans with grim determination. "You see what we are dealing with? Arthur, Richard said softly. She is trapped in the past. Her mind is completely fractured. We cannot leave her unsupervised for a single second. We need the legal authority to manage her care and her finances before she ruins herself completely. Dr. Evans did not ask me another question. He did not shine a light in my eyes, check my reflexes, or perform a single legitimate neurological test. He simply nodded his face, arranged into a mask of professional sympathy, while his eyes gleamed with the promise of a lucrative consulting fee paid directly from Richard's slush fund. It is a textbook case of advanced cognitive decline secondary to traumatic brain injury, Dr. Evans stated confidently, scribbling his signature across the bottom of the thick legal document on his clipboard. She lacks all capacity to make medical or financial decisions for herself. She is entirely dependent on you. I am signing the incompetency affidavit right now. He ripped the top copy from the clipboard and handed it directly to Brenda. Her fingers snatched the paper with lightning speed. The fake tears vanished instantly from her face, replaced by a look of triumphant, predatory greed. She stared at the signature that effectively erased my legal existence and turned me into a ghost in my own life. Thank you, Arthur, Brenda breathed, folding the paper carefully. This is a tragedy, but we will ensure she gets the best care possible. Dr. Evans nodded, packed up his briefcase, and let Richard escort him out of the room. The moment the front door closed downstairs, Brenda spun around to face the empty hallway. "It is done," she whispered, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. Richard walked back into the bedroom, his eyes fixed on the folded affidavit in Brenda's hand. He looked at me lying in the bed, drooling slightly onto my pillow, and then looked back at his wife. The power of attorney was too weak anyway, Brenda said, her eyes shining with malicious victory. A conservatorship gives us absolute total control. We do not just get her bank accounts, Richard. We get the corporate shares. We get the investment portfolios. We get her entire $8 million net worth. I kept my face perfectly blank, hiding the sudden spike of adrenaline surging through my chest. They knew about the $8 million. They had somehow discovered the total value of the assets I had hidden away. They were not just playing for the life insurance policy anymore. They were going for total financial annihilation. "Get the lawyer on the phone right now," Brenda ordered, her voice turning sharp and commanding. "Tell him we have the signed medical affidavit. I want an emergency Zoom hearing scheduled with the probate judge by tomorrow morning. We are seizing everything she owns. Tell him we are ready to proceed with the terminal diagnosis." The sun rose the next morning, casting long, pale shadows across my bedroom walls. The atmosphere in the house had shifted overnight from anxious panic to electric anticipation. Today was their payday. Today was the day they legally erased me and claimed my empire. I heard Brenda pacing the hallway outside my door, practicing her performance. When she finally walked into the room, she was entirely transformed. The heavy designer makeup was completely scrubbed away, leaving her face looking pale and appropriately haggard. She wore a modest faded gray cardigan over a simple white blouse. She had even removed her signature diamond stud earrings. She looked exactly like a devastated, exhausted mother who had spent weeks crying at her daughter's bedside. It was a terrifyingly perfect disguise. Richard followed closely behind her, pushing a heavy metal rolling cart. He placed a sleek silver laptop on the top tier and angled the webcam directly at my bed. I was the primary exhibit. I was the tragic broken prop they needed to sell their story. I knew exactly what to do. I let my jaw hang slack and allowed my eyes to roll back slightly, fixing my gaze on a meaningless spot on the ceiling. I focused on making my breathing shallow and erratic. I kept my hands curled into tight, unnatural fists, resting rigidly against my chest. I looked like a hollow shell of a human being. At exactly 9 o'clock, the laptop chimed. The screen split into two glowing squares. On one side was our grim little tableau. On the other side was Judge Harold Thompson. He sat in his private chambers, wearing his black robes, looking stern and perpetually overworked. Brenda did not waste a single second. The moment the judge introduced himself, she let out a ragged, heartbreaking sob. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, taking a shaky breath before she began to speak. "Your Honor," she whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. We are just so desperate. We do not know what else to do." The judge offered a sympathetic nod, adjusting his glasses. "I have reviewed the emergency petition, Mrs. Anderson. It is a tragic situation. Please tell me about your daughter's current condition." Brenda launched into a masterful monologue of absolute lies. She told the judge that my cognitive functions had completely evaporated over the last 48 hours. She described terrifying fabricated incidents where I supposedly wandered the house in the middle of the night, screaming violently at invisible intruders. She claimed I had lost the ability to swallow solid food and that I was rapidly wasting away. She is trapped in her own mind. "Your Honor," Brenda cried, dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. "We are terrified she is going to injure herself. The hospital discharged her too early, but the costs of private specialized care are astronomical. We need to hire 24-hour neurological nurses to keep her safe. We need to retrofit the house. We simply cannot afford it on our own. Kelsey has substantial resources, but her accounts are locked. We need access to her funds immediately so we can save her life." Richard stepped into the frame, his face arranged into a mask of stoic paternal sorrow. He held up the heavy manila folder containing Dr. Evans' fraudulent paperwork. "We had an independent specialist evaluate her yesterday evening, Your Honor." Richard stated, his deep voice conveying absolute authority. "Dr. Arthur Evans. He is a highly respected psychiatrist. His sworn affidavit is in the file we uploaded to the court portal this morning. He confirmed she has suffered catastrophic regression. She lacks all legal and mental capacity." I watched the judge from the corner of my eye. He clicked his mouse, opening the digital file. He scanned the document, reading the lies Dr. Evans had happily traded for a bribe. The affidavit bore the seal of a licensed medical professional. It was the ultimate validation of their cruel fiction. The judge sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. He looked at the webcam, his eyes landing directly on me. I stared blankly back, offering him nothing but the terrifying illusion of a destroyed mind. "I am so incredibly sorry for your family's burden," the judge said, his voice softening with genuine pity. "Cases involving traumatic brain injuries are deeply unpredictable and heartbreaking. Based on the overwhelming medical evidence provided by Dr. Evans and the clear, urgent necessity for specialized care, I am granting the emergency petition." Brenda let out a loud, dramatic gasp of relief, pressing her hands to her chest. "I am assigning temporary emergency conservatorship of the estate to the mother, Brenda Anderson," the judge declared formally. "You are hereby granted immediate and full legal authority over all financial accounts, investment portfolios, and corporate holdings belonging to the ward, Kelsey Anderson. The court order will be emailed to your attorney in 5 minutes. This hearing is adjourned." The screen went black, the digital connection severed. The silence in the bedroom lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Then the illusion shattered. Brenda stood up straight, rolling her shoulders and dropping the grieving mother act instantly. The fake tears vanished. Her face twisted into a sharp, triumphant sneer. Richard let out a low, booming laugh of pure victory, rubbing his hands together. They had won. They had legally stolen my life. Brittany stepped out from the shadowy hallway where she had been lurking out of the webcam's view. She walked right up to the edge of my mattress, crossing her arms over her chest. She leaned down, her face hovering just inches above mine. Her eyes were alight with malicious, greedy joy. "Checkmate, loser," Brittany whispered, her voice dripping with venom. They thought they had just unlocked the vault to an $8 million treasure chest. They were already mentally spending the money, planning the wire transfers to pay off Richard's massive IRS debt and funding Brittany's luxury penthouse. They thought they held all the power. What Brenda did not know, what none of them could possibly comprehend, was that they were celebrating over an empty grave. Exactly 10 minutes before Richard rolled that laptop into my room, I had been busy. While Brenda was in the bathroom scrubbing off her makeup, I had my hands buried deep beneath the thick pink comforter, gripping Jamal's architectural tablet. I had connected to the encrypted mobile hotspot and bypassed my firm's heavy security protocols. I had logged directly into my private banking mainframe. With 3 rapid keystrokes, I had executed a massive, irrevocable wire transfer. I swept every single liquid asset I owned. I liquidated my mutual funds, emptied my high-yield savings, and cashed out my corporate dividends. I moved 99% of my entire net worth out of the domestic accounts Brenda had just been granted access to. I routed the staggering $8 million fortune through a labyrinth of encrypted digital channels, bouncing it across 3 international borders before burying it deep inside an untraceable blind trust managed by an anonymous offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. By the time the judge struck his imaginary gavel and granted Brenda total control over my finances, she had won absolute legal authority over nothing. My primary bank accounts, the ones she was sprinting downstairs to access right this very second, currently held a grand total of $14.32. I kept my face perfectly slack, staring blankly at Brittany as she smirked at me. Let them celebrate. Let them call the bank. Let them taste the bitter ashes of their own destruction. The war had just officially begun. Brenda did not waste another second. She snatched her designer coat from the chair and grabbed the freshly printed court order. She practically sprinted down the hallway, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. She bypassed Richard, who was already drafting an email to his offshore creditors, and headed straight for the garage. She slid into her luxury SUV, her heart pounding with the thrill of absolute victory. She had the legal authority to drain my accounts, and she was not going to wait for the ink to dry on the judge's signature. She drove recklessly through the mid-morning traffic, cutting off other drivers and running a yellow light. She pulled into the parking lot of my wealth management bank, slamming the car into a visitor spot. She marched through the heavy glass doors, bypassing the line of regular customers waiting at the teller windows. She walked with the arrogant entitlement of a woman who believed she had just conquered the world. She headed straight for the glass-enclosed office of Mr. Harrison, the senior branch manager. She did not bother to knock. She pushed the door open and slapped the thick stack of legal documents directly onto his polished mahogany desk. "I need a cashier's check for $2 million, Brenda demanded, her voice ringing with manufactured urgency. "My daughter Kelsey Anderson has suffered a catastrophic neurological collapse. I have just been granted full emergency conservatorship over her entire estate. I need those funds liquidated immediately to pay for her 24-hour medical care." Mr. Harrison blinked in surprise, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at the court order. He was a meticulous man who had managed my primary accounts for 5 years. He knew my financial standing perfectly well. He picked up the paperwork and reviewed the judge's signature and the attached medical affidavit. "I am terribly sorry to hear about Kelsey's condition, Mrs. Anderson," Mr. Harrison said, his tone strictly professional but laced with caution. "These documents appear to be in order. Let me pull up the primary profiles and we can begin the transfer process." He turned to his dual monitors and began typing rapidly. Brenda stood over him, tapping her manicured fingernails against the edge of his desk. She was already calculating how quickly she could divert the $2 million into Richard's failing shell companies under the guise of anonymous medical consulting fees. Mr. Harrison stopped typing. His brow furrowed into a deep, confused frown. He clicked his mouse several times, pulling up a different screen. He leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes scanning the digital ledgers. "Is there a problem?" Brenda snapped, her patience already evaporating. "Print the check, Mr. Harrison. We do not have time for bureaucratic delays." "Mrs. Anderson?" Mr. Harrison said slowly, turning back to face her. "I cannot print a check for $2 million. Brenda slammed her hand flat against the desk. "I have a court order signed by a sitting probate judge. You do not have the authority to deny me access to those funds. You will print the check or I will have your job." "It is not a matter of authorization," Mr. Harrison replied, his voice remaining remarkably calm in the face of her rising hostility. "It is a matter of sufficient funds. The primary account does not hold $2 million. Brenda let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Do not play games with me. I know exactly what my daughter is worth. Check the mutual funds. Check the high-yield savings. Check the corporate dividend accounts. Liquidate whatever you have to, but give me my money." "I am looking at the comprehensive portfolio right now, Mrs. Anderson." Mr. Harrison stated, turning the monitor slightly so she could see the screen. Every single linked account has been fully liquidated. The mutual funds were cashed out. The investment portfolios were emptied. A massive consolidated wire transfer was executed from a secure, verified IP address exactly 10 minutes before your court order was electronically filed. Brenda stared at the screen. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. "Where did the money go?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was routed through an encrypted international clearinghouse," Mr. Harrison explained, pointing to a string of complex transaction codes. The funds were dispersed across multiple offshore entities. It is a highly sophisticated blind trust structure. It is completely untraceable and entirely irrevocable. Brenda gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. "What is left?" she demanded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "What is the remaining balance?" Mr. Harrison checked the primary ledger one last time. "It appears an automated refund from a canceled software subscription just posted 5 minutes ago. The total available balance across all of Kelsey Anderson's accounts is exactly $412. Brenda lost her mind. The carefully constructed facade of the grieving mother shattered into a million jagged pieces. She let out a piercing, completely unhinged shriek of pure rage. She swept her arm across Mr. Harrison's desk, sending his pen cup, a stack of files, and a framed photograph crashing to the floor. "You let her steal my money!" Brenda screamed, spit flying from her lips as she leaned over the desk. "You incompetent idiot! You reverse that wire right now! Bring it back!" "I cannot do that," Mr. Harrison said, standing up and stepping back from the desk, pressing a hidden button under the rim of his keyboard. The transfer was authorized using her primary biometric security keys. "It is gone, Mrs. Anderson." "You are hiding it!" Brenda shrieked, turning her fury toward the glass walls of the office. The entire bank had fallen silent. Dozens of wealthy clients and terrified tellers were staring at her. 2 armed security guards were already jogging across the lobby toward the office. Brenda realized she was completely exposed. She snatched her court order from the desk, her chest heaving with explosive, panicked breaths. She pushed past the security guards and practically ran out of the building. She threw herself into her SUV and slammed her foot on the accelerator. The drive home was a blur of aggressive, reckless fury. She gripped the leather steering wheel so hard her hands ached. Her mind was racing, connecting the terrifying dots. Kelsey was not a vegetable. The vacant stares, the drooling, the panic attacks. It was all a performance. The timing of the wire transfer was too perfect. Jamal hovering over the bed in the dark. He had a tablet. He was not checking on her. He was holding the digital door open while Kelsey robbed her blind. Brenda skidded into the driveway, braking so hard the tires squealed against the pavement. She left the car door open and stormed into the house. Richard was in the kitchen pouring a cup of coffee, but she ignored him completely. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her face twisted into a mask of absolute feral rage. She reached my bedroom and kicked the door open with the flat of her foot. The heavy wood slammed violently against the drywall. I was lying exactly where she had left me, staring blankly at the ceiling. But Brenda was done playing the game. She marched across the room, dropped the sweet mother act completely, and lunged at the bed. She violently grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head up from the pillows. Pain flared across my scalp as she jerked me forward, forcing me to look directly into her eyes. "Where is the money?" Brenda screamed, shaking my head viciously. "Stop playing dumb, you little brat. I know what you did. Where did you hide my $8 million? I let my eyes focus, snapping out of the vacant stare. I looked right back at her, offering a cold, terrifyingly clear smile. I did not say a word. I just let her scream. What Brenda did not know, what she was entirely too furious to notice, was the small black object nestled on the top shelf of the bookcase directly across from the bed. When Jamal had bent down to pick up his messenger bag, he had executed a secondary maneuver. He had quietly slipped a sleek GoPro camera behind a row of hardcover novels. The tiny red light on the front of the camera was blinking steadily. It was actively recording every scream, every violent shake, Every single second of Brenda physically assaulting a vulnerable patient was currently being captured in crystal clear, stunning 4K resolution. Brenda shook my head one last time, her manicured nails digging painfully into my scalp. She leaned in close, her breath hot against my face, demanding to know where her money had gone. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply held her furious gaze and let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had already won the war. The utter lack of fear in my eyes completely unnerved her. She released my hair with a disgusted scoff, shoving me back against the pillows. She turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the picture frames on the walls rattled. I lay back against the mattress, my scalp stinging, taking a deep, steadying breath. Let her scream. Let her rage. She had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to put her in a prison cell. The real financial apocalypse began the very next morning. I was sitting up in bed, scrolling through the live feed on my hidden digital earpiece. I had previously slipped a tiny wireless audio transmitter inside the air conditioning vent in the main downstairs hallway. It allowed me to hear every desperate, panicked conversation happening in the grand foyer. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I heard the heavy footsteps of Richard marching across the marble floor. He yanked the door open, his voice gruff and irritated as he spoke to the courier standing on the porch. A clipboard was produced. A signature was demanded. Richard scribbled his name and snatched the thick linen envelope from the delivery driver. I listened closely as the sound of tearing paper echoed through my earpiece. Brenda walked into the foyer, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She asked him what had arrived, her voice still strained and bitter from yesterday's massive defeat at the bank. Richard did not answer her immediately. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing. Brenda snapped, her patience entirely gone. What is it? It is from a corporate law firm in Manhattan. Richard finally said, his voice dropping to a hoarse, terrifying whisper. It is about the house, Brenda. The mortgage. Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms. What about the mortgage? We are a few months behind. We just need to stall the local bank until we secure a new bridge loan. Tell them we are liquidating assets. The local bank does not own the mortgage anymore, Richard replied, the paper rattling in his trembling hands. They sold the debt. The entire loan portfolio was bought out yesterday afternoon by a private equity firm, a company called Phoenix Holdings, LLC. Brenda dismissed the information with an arrogant wave of her hand. So what? We negotiate with Phoenix Holdings. We tell them we need a grace period. You are not listening to me, Richard roared, his sudden explosive anger echoing up the stairwell. They are not negotiating, Brenda. This is a notice of immediate foreclosure. Because the mortgage was heavily in default, the new holding company is calling in the full balance immediately. They are executing a hostile seizure of the property. We have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the county sheriff will arrive to forcibly evict us. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the foyer. The reality of the situation crashed down upon them like a concrete block. Their sprawling luxury estate, the ultimate symbol of their wealth and social dominance, was being ripped out from under them. We cannot lose the house, Brenda shrieked, panic finally bleeding into her voice. Call the business accounts. Use the corporate reserves from the construction firm to pay off the arrears. We will drain the operating budget if we have to. As if on cue, Richard's smartphone chimed loudly in his pocket. It was a high-priority email alert. I heard him pull the phone out and tap the screen. A sharp gasp escaped his lips. The sound was so pathetic, so utterly defeated, it sent a thrill of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. What is it now? Brenda demanded, her voice pitching upward into hysteria. It is the equipment suppliers. Richard breathed, his voice completely hollow. The companies leasing us the cranes, the excavators, the scaffolding for the downtown commercial projects. They got tired of the delayed payments. They sold our corporate debt to a third-party collection entity this morning. Brenda gripped the edge of the console table. Who bought the debt, Richard? He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Phoenix Holdings, LLC. The invisible noose had just snapped tight around their throats. The exact same holding company now owned their home and their business. They were completely surrounded and systematically dismantled by a corporate ghost. They had absolutely no idea that Phoenix Holdings, LLC, was the offshore shell company I had established months ago. I had used my own hidden wealth to buy their debts for pennies on the dollar. I was their new landlord, and I was their new executioner. Right in the middle of their hyperventilating meltdown, the heavy front door swung open again. Brittany strolled into the foyer carrying an armful of glossy designer shopping bags. She was wearing a custom silk blouse and oversized sunglasses, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse detonating around her. "Why is everyone screaming?" Brittany groaned, dropping the expensive shopping bags onto the marble floor. "You two are giving me a migraine." "We are losing everything," Brenda cried, grabbing her daughter by the arm. "The house, the business, all of it. A holding company is foreclosing on the estate." Brittany rolled her eyes, pulling her arm away from her mother's grasp. She let out a loud, dismissive laugh. "Who cares?" Brittany scoffed, adjusting her sunglasses. "Stop acting like poor people. It is embarrassing. I am hosting my massive med spa launch gala at the country club tomorrow night. Half the city's elite will be there. I will just network charm a few rich doctors and find us a new investor. One gala, and I will have enough capital to bail out your failing company anyway." She turned on her heel and pranced toward the grand staircase, completely confident in her delusions of grandeur. She was banking her entire future on this lavish launch party, expecting to establish her independent empire surrounded by champagne fountains and luxury catering. What the arrogant, cheating daughter did not know was that her launch gala was already dead. Jamal had paid a very quiet visit to the country club's event coordinator that morning. He had presented his legal identification, revoked his signature from their joint marital accounts, and permanently canceled the massive catering check. Brittany was not walking into a glamorous society launch. She was walking into a social slaughterhouse. Brittany's med spa launch gala at the Belmont Country Club was a masterclass in aggressive ostentation. The grand ballroom was draped in floor-to-ceiling white silk and illuminated by hundreds of floating crystal candles. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays of caviar blinis and vintage champagne. 300 of the city's wealthiest doctors, socialites, and venture capitalists milled around the room, admiring the massive digital projections showcasing Brittany's new luxury clinic. Brittany was in her element. She wore a backless emerald green gown that caught the light with every step, laughing loudly and kissing cheeks as she worked the room. She was practically vibrating with adrenaline, certain that tonight would cement her status as a medical industry mogul. She had also ensured I was a central prop in her performance. Brenda and Brittany had dressed me in a shapeless, faded gray wool sweater and a pair of sensible orthopedic shoes. They had tied my hair back into a severe, unflattering bun and instructed me to sit in a wheelchair near the edge of the stage. I was not paralyzed, and I did not need a wheelchair, but it made for a much better visual. I sat there perfectly still, letting my chin rest heavily on my chest, staring blankly at the polished marble floor. I looked exactly like the tragic, brain-damaged invalid they needed me to be. Jamal arrived just as the string quartet began playing. He looked incredibly sharp in a tailored midnight blue suit, holding a glass of bourbon. He played the role of the supportive, loving husband, flawlessly, leaning in to kiss Brittany's cheek and whispering words of encouragement. Brittany beamed, wrapping her arm through his, parading him around the room as the perfect accessory. She had absolutely no idea that her husband had spent the morning canceling her catering check and liquidating their joint accounts. I kept my head down, but my eyes tracked the movement at the back of the ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors swung open and Tara slipped inside. My lawyer was wearing a sleek charcoal pantsuit, carrying a thick leather briefcase that looked completely out of place among the designer clutches and cocktail dresses. She did not mingle. She did not grab a drink. She walked directly to a small cocktail table near the exit, set her briefcase down, and locked her eyes on the stage. She gave me a microscopic nod. We were in position. The trap was set. At exactly 8 o'clock, the string quartet stopped playing. The overhead lights dimmed to a soft, dramatic glow, and a brilliant spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. Brenda walked up the steps, clutching a crystal champagne flute. She was wearing a tasteful but expensive black dress, her hair styled into perfectly restrained waves. She looked out over the crowd of wealthy elites and tapped her manicured fingernail against the crystal glass. "Excuse me, everyone," Brenda said, her voice amplified by the hidden lapel microphone. "If I could just have your attention for a moment." The low hum of conversation faded as 300 heads turned toward the stage. Brittany stood at the bottom of the steps, gazing up at her mother with an expression of practiced devotion. "We are so incredibly thrilled to welcome you all tonight." Brenda began, her voice trembling perfectly. "We are here to celebrate Brittany's vision, her brilliance, and the launch of what will undoubtedly be the premier medical spa in this state." A round of polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Brenda held up her hand, signaling for silence, her face shifting from celebratory joy to profound sorrow. "But as we celebrate this incredible milestone, I must also speak to the terrible tragedy that has struck our family." Brenda continued, her voice cracking. She looked down from the stage, gesturing directly at me sitting in the wheelchair. "As many of you know, my older daughter Kelsey suffered a catastrophic accident a few weeks ago. She sustained a massive traumatic brain injury. She is trapped in her own mind, entirely dependent on us for her most basic needs. It has been the most devastating experience of our lives." A collective murmur of sympathy washed over the crowd. Several women pressed their hands to their chests, looking at me with absolute pity. I let a string of drool escape my lips, slipping down my chin to complete the performance. Brenda wiped a fake tear from her eye. "The medical costs are astronomical. The specialized neurological care, the retrofitting of our home, the 24-hour nursing staff. It is a burden that would break most families. But Brittany, in her infinite compassion, has decided to dedicate a portion of tonight's launch to her sister." Brittany stepped forward, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "We are establishing the Kelsey Anderson Memorial Care Fund," Brenda announced, projecting her voice to the back of the room. "We are asking our friends, our colleagues, and our investors to contribute tonight. Every single donation will go directly toward Kelsey's lifelong medical expenses and to ensuring Brittany's clinic has the resources to expand its neurological rehabilitation wing." It was a masterstroke of predatory fundraising. They were using my fake brain damage to solicit hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax-free donations straight into a slush fund they controlled. They were robbing these wealthy investors right to their faces and using my tragedy as the bait. "Please," Brenda pleaded, holding her champagne glass high. "Give generously. Help us save my daughter. Help us build a future out of this tragedy." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. People were already reaching for their checkbooks, pulling out their phones to scan the donation QR codes displayed on the digital screens. It was a sickening display of emotional manipulation, and it was working perfectly. But as the applause reached its peak, a sharp metallic screech cut through the sound system. The massive digital projection screens behind Brenda flickered violently. The glossy images of Brittany's med spa vanished. The screens went entirely black. Then a single crisp, high-definition image flashed across the massive displays, illuminating the entire ballroom in harsh white light. It was a photograph of the official notice of immediate foreclosure from Phoenix Holdings, LLC, clearly showing Richard's name and the family mansion's address. The applause died instantly. The entire room went dead silent. Brenda froze on stage, her champagne glass suspended in the air. She turned around, squinting at the massive projection. When her eyes registered the legal document, the color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. "What is this?" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing through the lapel mic. "Turn that off! Turn it off right now!" But the image did not vanish. It changed. The screens flickered again, projecting a highly detailed spreadsheet. It was Richard's shadow ledger, the exact document detailing the $4 million in fraudulent federal loans and the subsequent embezzlement. The numbers were massive, highlighted in bright red ink for every single investor in the room to see. Richard shoved his way through the crowd, his face purple with rage, sprinting toward the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. "Cut the power," he roared, shoving a waiter out of his way. "Pull the plug." The screens changed one more time before Richard could reach the booth. This time, it was a video. The crystal-clear 4K footage captured by Jamal's hidden GoPro camera filled the massive displays. There was Brenda storming into my bedroom, dropping the sweet mother act completely. The audio blasted through the ballroom speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Where is the money?" The digital Brenda screamed, her face twisted into a feral mask. The entire country club watched in absolute horrified silence as Brenda violently grabbed me by the hair, yanking my head off the pillows and shaking me viciously. "Stop playing dumb, you little brat. I know what you did. Where did you hide my $8 million?" A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The wealthy doctors and socialites who had just been reaching for their checkbooks recoiled in disgust. The illusion was shattered. They were not watching a tragic family struggling with a medical crisis. They were watching a violent predatory assault. Brenda stood on the stage completely paralyzed, staring at the 50-foot projection of her own violence. The microphone picked up her ragged, panicked breathing, broadcasting her terror to the entire room. I slowly reached up and wiped the fake drool from my chin. I unbuckled the safety strap of the wheelchair and stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles out of my faded wool sweater and rolled my shoulders, cracking my neck. I looked up at Brenda, standing frozen on the stage. I did not look brain-damaged anymore. I looked exactly like the woman who had just burned her entire world to the ground. "I believe I can answer that question, Mother," I said, my voice ringing clear and strong across the silent ballroom. Brenda's eyes widened to the size of saucers. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled so violently the expensive liquid sloshed over the rim and stained her immaculate black silk dress. She had been staring at the 50-foot projection of her own feral rage, but the sound of my voice, perfectly coherent and laced with ice, snapped her attention back to the floor. She pointed a shaking finger at me, expecting me to slump back into the wheelchair. She expected the vacant stare and the drool. She expected the broken, vulnerable victim she had spent weeks torturing behind closed doors. I had spent weeks trapped in a physical prison of their making. I had endured the pinching, the screaming, and the endless hours staring at the ceiling while they plotted to steal my life. Standing up was not just a physical movement, it was a complete resurrection. I took a deliberate, purposeful step forward. My posture was lethal. The frumpy gray wool sweater and the sensible orthopedic shoes could not hide the absolute terrifying confidence radiating from every single movement I made. I did not shuffle. I did not slouch. I walked with the authority of a woman executing a flawless, calculated strike. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. Wealthy venture capitalists and elite surgeons shrank back, pressing themselves against the white silk drapery. The silence in the ballroom was absolute and deafening. The only sound was the steady rhythmic click of my shoes against the polished marble floor. I reached the carpeted steps of the stage and glided up them without a single ounce of hesitation. Brittany tried to intervene. She took a step toward me, her emerald gown swishing against the stairs. "Kelsey, what are you doing?" she hissed, her fake smile plastered on for the cameras. I did not even break my stride. I simply turned my head and gave her a look so cold, so completely devoid of mercy, that she physically recoiled, stumbling back against the decorative floral arrangements. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just sprung shut. I ignored her completely and stepped into the blinding glare of the spotlight right beside my mother. Brenda was completely paralyzed. Her mind was visibly misfiring, unable to reconcile the brain-damaged prop she had dressed me up as, with the terrifyingly lucid woman standing inches away from her. The heavy layers of designer makeup could not hide the stark terror settling into her features. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the cool metal of the microphone. I did not yank it. I simply applied steady, unyielding pressure until her manicured fingers went limp and released it. I held the microphone to my lips. I looked out over the sea of 300 horrified faces. I saw Jamal standing near the back bar, leaning casually against the mahogany counter. He raised his glass of bourbon in a silent, solitary toast, a proud smirk playing on his lips. I saw Tara, my lawyer, standing by the exit, her arms crossed, wearing a razor-sharp smile. The trap was locked. There was absolutely no escape. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, sharp and articulate. "It is truly a miracle. I am completely healed." I let the words hang in the air, letting the heavy, dripping sarcasm wash over the wealthy crowd. The silence was so profound, I could hear the hum of the lighting fixtures above us. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Brenda. Her face had gone from sickly pale to a mottled, furious red. The sheer panic in her eyes was intoxicating. Which means I no longer need the emergency conservatorship you committed perjury to obtain, I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority. The collective gasp from the ballroom was loud enough to rival the crashing of a wave. A woman in the front row adorned in diamonds pressed a hand over her mouth in sheer horror. A prominent local politician who had just been reaching for his checkbook slowly slid it back into his tailored jacket, taking a deliberate step away from the stage. The whispers erupted instantly, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. The wealthy elites realized the depth of the scam playing out in front of them. They were not just angry, they were deeply insulted. The upper crust of the city did not like being played for fools. They did not like being used as an ATM for a bankrupt family trying to fund a med spa with stolen money. The whispers turned into disgusted murmurs. I heard a prominent surgeon near the front mutter the word fraud. Someone else toward the back demanded that security lock the doors. They realized they had been invited to a luxury gala solely to be extorted by a family running a fraudulent medical charity based on a fabricated tragedy. Brenda tried to laugh. She forced a high-pitched grating sound from her throat, holding her hands out to the crowd as if to say this was all a grand misunderstanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, my daughter is clearly confused," Brenda announced, her voice trembling badly. "The brain injury has caused severe delusions." But the words fell flat, dying in the cavernous space of the ballroom. Nobody was buying the act anymore. The video of her screaming at me was still paused on the massive screens behind us, a 50-foot monument to her guilt. Brenda's survival instincts finally kicked in, but they were fueled by blind, panicked rage rather than logic. The perfectly cultivated image of the tragic society matriarch disintegrated completely. She lunged forward, her manicured hands clawing desperately at the microphone. She was frantic to cut the audio, to stop the bleeding, to somehow wrestle back control of the narrative she had spent weeks building. She grabbed the base of the microphone, trying to wrench it from my iron grip. She leaned in close, her face twisted into a vicious, ugly snarl. The elegant mother vanished, revealing the cruel, greedy woman underneath. Her breath hitched as she hissed violently right into the mesh screen. "Sit down, you psychotic little brat," she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "I will destroy you." She had completely forgotten that the microphone was live. The highly sensitive audio equipment picked up every single syllable of her vicious threat. The sound system amplified her venom, blasting it through the massive ballroom speakers at deafening volume. A sharp screech of audio feedback pierced the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of Brenda threatening the very daughter she had just been begging the crowd to save. The entire room heard it. The elegant, grieving mother had just snarled like a street brawler. The whispering in the crowd stopped instantly, replaced by a wave of vocal outrage. People were actively backing away toward the exits. Brenda froze, her hands still clutching the base of the microphone, realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her mistake. The microphone slipped from her fingers as she stared out at the sea of disgusted faces. She had built her entire life on appearances, and in less than 5 minutes, she had broadcast her own destruction in stunning high definition. I stood tall under the glaring spotlight. The cheap gray wool sweater and orthopedic shoes no longer looked like the uniform of a victim. They looked like the camouflage of a predator who had successfully infiltrated the enemy camp and was now standing over the general. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, broken only by Brenda's ragged, panicked breathing as she stared at me in total horror. I looked out at the sea of wealthy investors, elite surgeons, and high society socialites. These were the people my mother and sister worshipped. These were the people they desperately wanted to impress and exploit. I raised my right hand into the bright beam of the spotlight and snapped my fingers. The sharp sound echoed like a gunshot across the cavernous room. At the back of the ballroom, Tara stepped out from the shadows. My brilliant attorney moved with ruthless military efficiency. She did not look at the crowd, and she did not hesitate. She walked directly to the master audio-visual control board, overriding the country club technician, who was too stunned to stop her. She plugged a sleek silver cable from her laptop directly into the mainframe. She typed a quick command and hit the enter key with a resounding clack. The massive digital screens behind the stage flickered and blazed to life. The violent video of Brenda assaulting me vanished. In its place, stark high-definition legal documents illuminated the entire room, casting a harsh white glow over the stunned audience. I held the microphone close, keeping my voice steady, unwavering, and lethally calm. Since we are all gathered here tonight under the noble guise of charity, let us talk about finances. I gestured gracefully to the towering screens behind me. My loving parents applied for an emergency medical conservatorship 48 hours ago. They submitted a sworn medical affidavit claiming I was completely brain dead. They stood before a judge and wept, demanding immediate control over my personal bank accounts. A collective wave of disgust washed over the crowd. Women in designer gowns whispered harshly to their husbands. A prominent hospital director shook his head in absolute revulsion, crossing his arms over his chest. They did this for one specific reason. I continued pacing slowly across the edge of the stage. They wanted to seize my personal fortune to save their own collapsing empire. They wanted to steal my money to fund this absurd med spa and pay off their massive hidden debts. Richard's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. He took a heavy, aggressive step toward the stage, his fists clenched at his sides. "You lying little witch!" he bellowed, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "Turn those screens off right now." Before he could take another step, two burly security guards stepped seamlessly into his path. Jamal had hired them for the evening, and they crossed their massive arms, blocking Richard completely. Jamal stood just behind them, swirling his bourbon, watching Richard with a dark, amused smile. He raised his glass in a silent, mocking toast. Unfortunately for my parents, their grand heist hit a slight complication. I said, my voice slicing through Richard's yelling. When my mother rushed to the bank yesterday morning to liquidate my accounts, she found nothing. That is because I had already transferred every single cent of my net worth into a secure offshore trust. A trust managed by an aggressive private equity firm. I paused, letting the tension stretch tight across the room. I looked directly down at Richard, watching the vein bulge in his neck. "A firm named Phoenix Holdings, LLC, I announced. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Richard physically staggered backward as if he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. Brenda let out a strangled whimpering sound, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. I pointed to the massive screen on the left. "That document currently displayed for all your esteemed colleagues to read is a notice of immediate foreclosure. It is for the Anderson family estate. Your precious mansion, Richard. The property has been heavily in default for 18 months. The local bank was tired of your empty promises, so they sold the debt." I turned and pointed to the screen on the right. "And that is a comprehensive portfolio of commercial debt. Every unpaid invoice, every leased crane, every scaffolding contract your construction firm has defaulted on for the past 2 years. Your suppliers were terrified of bankruptcy, so they sold your debts to a third-party collection entity." The wealthy crowd was captivated. They were staring at the screens, reading the massive multi-million-dollar deficits highlighted in bright red ink. My family's entire financial reality was stripped bare and exposed to the exact people they desperately wanted to impress. The humiliation was absolute. I bought it all. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that demanded total attention. "I used the money you tried to steal from me to buy your debts for pennies on the dollar. You thought Phoenix Holdings was a faceless corporate entity. You thought you could charm them or stall them or negotiate. You were wrong. I am the sole CEO of Phoenix Holdings." Brenda's knees finally buckled. She dropped to the stage floor, her expensive black silk dress pooling around her. She was weeping genuine tears of absolute ruin. Richard stood frozen, surrounded by his peers, staring up at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. I stepped to the very edge of the stage, looking directly down into their terrified eyes. "I own your house. I stated the words, striking like physical blows. I own your business debts. And because you are severely in arrears, I am calling in the full balance immediately. I am not negotiating. I am not giving you a grace period. As of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, you are both completely homeless and entirely bankrupt. The silence that followed was heavy and final. The verdict had been delivered and executed in front of 300 witnesses. Suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the quiet. Brittany, who had been standing frozen at the bottom of the steps, finally snapped. Her entire world had just evaporated. Her med spa launch was destroyed, her elite guests were leaving in absolute disgust, and the family wealth she relied on was officially gone. She realized she would have to actually work for a living. The delusion shattered, leaving behind only feral desperation. "You ruined my life!" Brittany screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. "You psychotic, ugly freak!" She kicked off her designer heels and lunged. Her emerald gown twisted around her legs as she scrambled violently up the wooden stairs, her hands hooked into claws aiming directly for my throat. She never made it. Before her manicured claws could even graze the fabric of my sweater, a solid, immovable force stepped directly between us. Jamal moved with a predatory grace that betrayed his usual laid-back demeanor. He did not shout and he did not rush. He simply stepped in front of me, acting as an impenetrable physical shield. Brittany slammed hard against his tailored midnight blue suit, the impact jarring her backward. She stumbled, teetering dangerously on the edge of the carpeted steps before catching her balance. "Get out of my way, Jamal!" she shrieked, her chest heaving as she glared at him. "This has nothing to do with you. She ruined everything." Jamal looked down at his wife with an expression of absolute Arctic disgust. He calmly switched his glass of bourbon to his left hand. With his right hand, he reached out to me. I did not hesitate. I placed the microphone into his waiting palm and took a single deliberate step back, yielding the stage to the next executioner. Jamal tapped the microphone once. The sharp thud echoed through the silent ballroom, demanding absolute attention. 300 pairs of eyes shifted from the massive foreclosure documents glowing on the screens to the handsome, sharp-suited husband standing over his frantic wife. "It actually has everything to do with me," Jamal said, his voice smooth, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Because while my sister-in-law has just flawlessly exposed the financial rot at the core of this family, I feel it is my duty to expose the rot at the core of this marriage." Brittany froze. The feral anger contorting her face instantly morphed into sheer, unadulterated panic. "Jamal, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice cracking as she looked around at the sea of wealthy investors and elite socialites watching her every move. "Please do not do this here." But Jamal was already looking past her, addressing the captivated audience. "I know many of you received lavish invitations to this gala." Jamal continued pacing slowly across the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I know my wife has been aggressively soliciting you for investments, painting the picture of a visionary entrepreneur, ready to revolutionize the medical spa industry. She spun a beautiful narrative of luxury success and innovation. But before anyone in this room considers pulling out a checkbook to fund her little vanity project, there are a few pertinent details you should know about her business ethics." He stopped pacing and zeroed in on a specific table near the front. The crowd collectively held its breath, turning to follow his gaze. For instance, Jamal said, his voice echoing through the sound system. "Let us talk about how tonight's extravagant party was funded. The caviar, the vintage champagne, the imported silk drapery covering these walls. My wife did not pay for a single ounce of it. Instead, she stole my personal information, forged my signature, and opened 4 massive lines of credit in my name. She maxed out every single one of them to pay for this fraudulent masquerade." A fresh wave of shock rippled through the ballroom. The socialites who had just been drinking that stolen champagne suddenly looked sick to their stomachs. Brittany shook her head frantically, holding her hands up to the crowd. "It is a lie," she stammered desperately. "He is lying. It is a misunderstanding with the bank." But Jamal did not even glance at her. His gaze remained locked on the front row, boring into a very specific man sitting frozen in his chair. "But financial fraud is not the only thing Brittany has been busy with lately." Jamal stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp tone. He pointed directly at a distinguished older man sitting rigidly beside his elegant wife. I believe Dr. Harris, our esteemed chief of plastic surgery, can attest to her other extracurricular activities. The entire ballroom shifted its focus to Dr. Harris. The man turned the color of chalk. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead as he tugged frantically at his silk tie. His wife, sitting right next to him, turned her head slowly to look at him, her expression shifting from confusion to absolute horror. You see, Jamal continued, his voice echoing relentlessly. While Brittany was busy draining my credit to fund her clinic, she was also busy securing her lead surgical consultant. And she did not do it by negotiating a contract. She secured his services by spending 3 afternoons a week in the private on-call room of Dr. Harris. The ballroom erupted. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated chaos. Dr. Harris's wife let out a piercing shriek of betrayal and slapped her husband across the face with such force the crack echoed over the crowd noise. She grabbed her purse, threw her champagne directly into his lap, and stormed down the center aisle, shoving past waiters and investors alike. Dr. Harris sat paralyzed, humiliated, and destroyed in front of every major medical professional in the city. Brittany let out a hollow, devastated sob. She looked around at her socialite friends, the women she had spent years desperately trying to impress and manipulate. They were looking at her like she was covered in toxic waste. They were whispering behind their hands, turning their backs, pointing their chins up in absolute disgust. The elite circle she craved had just permanently slammed its doors shut. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound with a rigid black clip. He looked down at Brittany, standing at the bottom of the stairs, stripped of every lie and illusion she had ever told. He stepped down one stair, closing the distance between them. He raised the stack of papers and slapped them flat against her chest. The sound was a loud, definitive thwack against the silk of her emerald gown. Brittany instinctively brought her arms up to catch them, fumbling clumsily as the thick legal packet slid into her trembling hands. Those are divorce papers, Jamal said, staring dead into her eyes. They include a civil suit for identity theft and wire fraud. I am taking everything, Brittany. Every shoe, every handbag, every piece of jewelry you bought with my money. You are walking out of this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing. Brittany collapsed. The sheer weight of the absolute destruction broke her legs out from under her. She fell to her knees on the hard marble floor, the divorce papers scattering around her like dead leaves. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing with loud, ugly, heaving gasps that echoed through the room. She was completely broken, bankrupt, humiliated, and entirely alone. At the back of the room, standing near the entrance of the catering kitchen, Richard watched his golden child sobbing on the floor. He looked from Brittany up to the massive projection screens that still displayed the devastating reality of his commercial defaults and his impending foreclosure. He looked at the furious faces of the investors he had tried to scam. He did the math. The empire was gone. The reputation was ashes. The criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement were practically writing themselves. Richard did not rush forward to comfort his weeping wife or his devastated daughter. Instead, his survival instincts as a career coward took over. He took a slow, quiet step backward, retreating into the shadows of the catering hallway. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with the furious crowd, turning his back on his family, as he tried to quietly slip out the back exit of the ballroom. Richard pushed through the heavy, brushed steel swinging doors of the catering kitchen. The sudden transition from the hushed, horrified ballroom to the bright, chaotic preparation area was jarring. Waiters and prep cooks scrambled out of his way, startled by the sudden intrusion of the furious, sweating patriarch. He ignored them all, shoving past stainless steel prep tables and towering racks of dirty dishes. His chest heaved with exertion and panic. He just needed to reach the loading dock. He still had a burner phone in his glove compartment and a secondary passport in a safe deposit box downtown. If he could just get to his car, he could disappear before the financial regulators froze his hidden backup accounts. He hit the heavy metal push bar of the rear exit door, with his shoulder bursting out into the cool night air. He did not find freedom. He found a solid, impenetrable wall of dark windbreakers and tactical gear. The loading dock was swarming with law enforcement. Harsh red and blue emergency lights pulsed silently against the brick walls of the country club, painting the alleyway in violent flashes of color. At least a dozen armed officers stood waiting. Front and center stood a line of stern-faced men and women wearing jackets emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They were flanked by a heavily armed detachment of local police. Richard stopped so fast his expensive leather shoes skidded on the damp concrete. He threw his hands up instinctively. His arrogant sneer faltered, replaced instantly by the pathetic, terrified expression of a trapped rat. "There must be some mistake," Richard stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. He took a cautious step backward, bumping against the heavy metal door he had just exited. "I am Richard Anderson. I am a prominent local developer. You are trespassing on a private event. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge here immediately." A tall, broad-shouldered federal agent stepped forward. His expression was carved from granite, completely unmoved by Richard's pathetic attempt to throw his weight around. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Anderson," the lead agent said, his voice flat and authoritative. "And we are exactly where we are supposed to be." From the shadows of the loading dock, Tara emerged. My brilliant lawyer moved with the calm, predatory grace of a shark that had just cornered its bleeding prey. She bypassed Richard entirely and walked straight up to the lead federal agent. She reached into the pocket of her sleek charcoal pantsuit and retrieved a silver flash drive, holding it up between her fingers. "Here is everything we discussed," Agent Miller Tara said, her voice ringing crisp and clear in the cool night air. "The drive contains the complete unredacted dual accounting ledgers for Phoenix Holdings and all associated shell companies. It includes the offshore routing numbers, the wire transfer logs, and the encrypted emails detailing the embezzlement scheme. It also contains the pristine 4K video footage of Brenda Anderson physically assaulting my client, a vulnerable adult, while maintaining a fraudulent medical conservatorship." Richard let out a strangled, pathetic wheeze. He looked at Tara as if she were the Grim Reaper herself. "You cannot do this," he pleaded, holding his hands out. "I can make a deal. I have information. I can give you names." The lead agent did not even look at him. He took the flash drive from Tara and slipped it securely into his tactical vest. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to the local police officers flanking him. "Take him," the agent ordered. Two heavy-set officers moved with lightning speed. They grabbed Richard by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the cold steel of the loading dock door. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed like a gunshot in the alley. Richard did not fight back. He simply sagged against the metal, weeping openly, his prestigious reputation and his stolen fortune instantly reduced to absolutely nothing. But the operation was not finished. The lead agent signaled to the rest of the tactical team, and they moved purposefully forward, pushing past the sobbing Richard and entering the country club through the catering kitchen. Back inside the main ballroom, the elite crowd was still reeling from Jamal's devastating reveal. Brittany was still a crumpled, sobbing mess on the floor, her designer gown ruined, her social standing annihilated. But the collective gasp of the room shifted abruptly as the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A dozen uniformed police officers and federal agents marched into the luxurious space. The wealthy doctors, socialites, and venture capitalists parted instantly, scrambling over themselves to get out of the way of the law enforcement raid. The string quartet, which had been standing frozen in the corner, hurriedly backed away, pressing themselves against the silk drapery. The agents marched with singular aggressive purpose directly down the center aisle, moving straight toward the stage. Brenda was still standing near the podium, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic failure of her master plan. Her expensive black silk dress was still stained with spilled champagne. Her hair was a wild, frizzy mess. She looked up, blinking blindly into the harsh glare of the spotlight as the wall of police officers surrounded the stage. Brenda Anderson, a stern female officer, barked, stepping up the carpeted stairs. Brenda let out a piercing, guttural shriek. It was not a cry of sorrow, it was the sound of a cornered, vicious animal realizing it had been caught. She took a frantic step backward, waving her arms frantically in front of her. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, her voice echoing wildly through the ballroom. "You have no right. I am a respected member of this community. My daughter is sick. I am trying to save her." The female officer did not hesitate. She grabbed Brenda by the wrist, twisting her arm sharply behind her back and forcing her face down against the polished wooden floor of the stage. Brenda thrashed and kicked her expensive heels flying off into the crowd, but she was easily overpowered. The metallic clack of the handcuffs snapping shut over her wrists signaled the absolute end of her reign of terror. "Brenda Anderson, you are under arrest," the officer stated loudly, her voice carrying to the very back of the silent, horrified ballroom. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are being charged with multiple counts of felony insurance fraud, perjury, grand larceny, elder abuse, and the aggravated physical assault of a vulnerable adult." The crowd watched in absolute stunned silence as the former queen of the local social scene was hauled roughly to her feet. Brenda's wealthy facade was utterly shattered. The heavy layers of designer makeup were smeared with tears and sweat, making her look grotesque and unhinged. The elite investors she had tried to scam looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. They pulled their expensive coats tighter around themselves, stepping back as the officers dragged her toward the center aisle. As they hauled her past the edge of the stage, Brenda stopped struggling. Her legs went limp, forcing the officers to drag her by the arms. She turned her head, her neck straining against the grip of the police. She looked up at the stage, looking past the blinding spotlight and the ruined gala. She looked directly at me. I stood perfectly still, the frumpy gray wool sweater standing in stark contrast to the absolute victory radiating from my posture. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked down at the woman who had tormented me, stolen from me, and tried to erase my existence. Brenda stared up at me, her eyes wide and bloodshot. The feral anger was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, empty realization of her own absolute destruction. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling as tears carved deep tracks through her ruined makeup. She was weeping silent, pathetic tears of total defeat. The silent tears did not last long. The sheer, suffocating reality of her impending prison sentence and her total financial ruin finally snapped the very last thread of Brenda's heavily guarded sanity. She lunged forward against the tight grip of the arresting officers, dragging her bruised knees across the polished marble floor. She fought against the cold steel handcuffs biting into her wrists, desperately trying to reach up and grab the hem of my cheap, frumpy sweater. "Kelsey, please," Brenda wailed, her voice cracking and echoing terribly through the dead, silent ballroom. "I gave you life. I am your mother. You cannot do this to your own family." Her begging was a pathetic, grotesque display. She scrambled to use the very concepts of love and family that she had weaponized against me my entire life. She wanted me to remember a maternal bond that had never actually existed. She wanted mercy from the daughter she had gleefully thrown to the wolves. She looked up at me, her face a ruined mask of smeared mascara and absolute terror, hoping to find a shred of the weak, obedient girl I used to be. I looked down at her from the elevated stage. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel like an inconvenient burden. I looked at the mother who had violently shaken me and screamed in my face while I lay trapped in a hospital bed. I looked at the greedy, heartless monster who had tried to steal my future to fund her own shallow vanity. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering guilt. There was no hesitation. There was no pity. There was only a profound, sweeping sense of total closure. I slowly raised the microphone back to my lips. I did not yell. I did not need to raise my voice even a fraction. The quiet, cold authority in my tone carried flawlessly through the massive overhead speakers wrapping around the room like a heavy velvet blanket. "Do not be dramatic, Brenda," I said, echoing the exact cruel words she had whispered to me in the intensive care unit when she thought my life was over. "I'm just pulling the plug on a bad investment." The words struck her like a physical blow. When I delivered that line, the ballroom reacted as if lightning had struck the center of the stage. The sheer poetic justice of the statement resonated through the crowd. The venture capitalists who had nearly been swindled out of their millions looked up at the stage with a newfound profound respect. They recognized a ruthless corporate execution when they saw one, and they knew they had just witnessed a masterclass in hostile takeovers. Brenda let out a sound that was less human and more like a dying, wounded animal. It was a visceral, gut-wrenching scream of total agony. The two female officers hauled her roughly to her feet, ignoring her frantic thrashing. They dragged her backward down the center aisle, her expensive black silk gown catching and tearing on the chairs as she kicked and screamed all the way to the heavy mahogany exit doors. Moments later, the doors from the catering kitchen swung open. Richard was marched into the ballroom flanked by three massive federal agents. His expensive tailored suit was torn at the shoulder, and his face was bruised from being slammed against the loading dock doors. He looked completely hollowed out, an arrogant man who had finally met a wall he could not bribe or bully his way through. He refused to look at the stage, keeping his head bowed in ultimate crushing shame as the agents steered him toward the waiting squad cars. Brittany was the last to go. She was not in handcuffs, but she was entirely, utterly ruined. Two local police officers stepped to her sides, firmly directing her toward the exit. The elite socialite circle she had spent her entire adult life desperately trying to infiltrate actively turned their backs on her. The wealthy women she had called friends whispered in open disgust, pulling their expensive gowns away as if her failure was contagious. Brittany stumbled down the aisle, sobbing uncontrollably, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor, her fake empire reduced to absolute ashes. The massive 50-foot screens behind me finally clicked off, plunging the stage back into normal, elegant lighting. But the damage was permanently burned into the retinas of every single person in that room. The elite crowd stood frozen in stunned, silent awe. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. They simply watched the absolute surgical dismantling of the Anderson family with terrified respect. They understood perfectly clear that the unassuming woman in the gray wool sweater was the most dangerous person in the room. I placed the microphone gently onto the wooden podium. I turned my back on the empty wheelchair, leaving the ultimate symbol of their deceit sitting uselessly under the stage lights. I smoothed my sweater, rolled my shoulders back, and walked down the carpeted stairs with my head held high. Jamal was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. He looked immaculate in his midnight blue suit, his posture relaxed but commanding. He had played his role flawlessly, enduring Brittany's endless vanity and Richard's condescension, all while quietly gathering the financial records and the hidden camera footage that had sealed their fate. We had spent weeks orchestrating this exact moment, verifying every single offshore routing number setting, every legal trap, and ensuring there was absolutely no escape for the people who had tried to destroy us. He looked at me, his dark eyes shining with profound respect and absolute vindication. We did not need to say a single word to each other. The victory was complete. Jamal held out his arm. I looped my arm smoothly through his, leaning slightly against him as we turned toward the exit. The crowd parted for us, instantly stepping back to create a wide, clear path down the center aisle. We walked together, our footsteps echoing in sync against the marble floor, leaving the ruined gala, the shattered illusions, and the ashes of my former family far behind us. We pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool, clean night air, ready to finally start living. The crisp night air hit my lungs like a physical release. Jamal and I walked shoulder to shoulder down the sweeping asphalt driveway of the country club, leaving the flashing red and blue emergency lights reflecting off the manicured oak trees. We did not look back. We did not need to. The sirens wailing in the distance sounded like a victory march. The chapter on the Anderson family was officially violently closed. 3 months passed with the swift, merciless efficiency of a corporate restructuring. The fallout from the gala was spectacular and absolute. The local media devoured the story, stripping away decades of carefully manufactured high society prestige and exposing the rotting foundation beneath. Every local news channel ran the footage of Brenda being dragged out in handcuffs. I watched the empire crumble from the comfort of my downtown penthouse, sipping coffee and reviewing the meticulous legal updates Tara sent me every single morning. Jamal was the very first to emerge from the wreckage completely unburdened. With the extensive documentation Tara and I provided, the bank swiftly cleared the fraudulent charges from his name and completely restored his immaculate credit score. He did not waste a single second dwelling on his ruined marriage. With full financial backing from Phoenix Holdings, Jamal launched his own independent architectural firm. He leased a stunning loft space in the industrial design district, filling it with massive drafting tables and a team of hungry, talented associates. I visited his office on opening day. He stood in the center of the sunlit room, looking lighter and younger than he had in years. He hugged me tightly, thanking me for giving him the leverage to finally cut the toxic dead weight from his life. He was no longer playing a supporting role to a family of grifters. He was thriving entirely on his own merit, building a legacy that nobody could ever steal from him. The same could not be said for my former family. The federal justice system moves slowly, but when it finally strikes, it strikes with devastating, absolute finality. Richard and Brenda were denied bail. The sheer volume of evidence against them, from the offshore tax evasion ledgers to the fraudulent medical conservatorship, made them enormous flight risks. Their highly publicized trial was a masterclass in humiliation. Without my offshore funds to steal, they were forced to rely on a severely overworked public defender. They sat at the defense table looking small and pathetic, their expensive tailored suits replaced by standard-issue jail clothes. The judge handed down a crushing verdict. Richard and Brenda were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, tax evasion, and elder abuse. They would spend the rest of their natural lives behind concrete walls, stripped of their country club memberships, their designer wardrobes, and their stolen dignity. There would be no early parole, there would be no luxurious white-collar facility. They were facing hard time. Brittany faced a different kind of prison. The medical board permanently revoked her license, citing gross ethical violations and massive credit fraud. She narrowly avoided jail time by turning state evidence against her own parents, eagerly throwing them under the bus to save her own skin. But freedom without money was a harsh, brutal reality Brittany was entirely unequipped to handle. Last week, Jamal sent me a photograph he snapped from across a local shopping mall. It showed Brittany wearing a cheap polyester uniform shirt, aggressively folding denim jeans at a discount retail store. Her heavy makeup could not hide the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes. Her expression was a permanent mask of bitter resentment. She was working grueling shifts for minimum wage, forced to cater to the exact same middle-class shoppers she had spent her entire life mocking. She had to clock in, she had to clock out, and she had to answer to a manager 10 years younger than her. It was a poetic, flawless punishment. The final piece of business brought me back to the sprawling suburban mansion where it all started. I stood on the massive stone balcony, looking out over the overgrown lawn and the drained swimming pool. The silence of the foreclosed estate was beautiful. It no longer held any power over me. It was just a building made of brick and glass. The heavy wooden front doors clicked open. Tara walked out onto the balcony, accompanied by a sharply dressed notary. I turned to greet them, feeling the warm afternoon sun on my face. Tara handed me a thick stack of legal documents and a heavy black pen. I did not keep the mansion. I had zero interest in living inside a monument to my own childhood misery. I placed the pen against the signature line and pressed down firmly. I signed the deed over to a prominent local charity. The organization specialized in providing emergency housing and dedicated legal support for survivors of domestic and financial abuse. The Anderson family estate, the very place where they had plotted to steal my life, would literally become a sanctuary for women exactly like me. It would be a place of healing and rebuilding, funded entirely by the fortune they had tried to steal. I handed the documents back to Tara. We shared a quiet, knowing smile of absolute vindication. The paperwork was stamped and notarized, sealing the transfer forever. I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase for the very last time, stepping out into the circular driveway and getting into my waiting car. I put the engine in gear and drove out through the massive wrought iron gates. I did not check the rearview mirror. I took a deep, clean breath, finally completely and beautifully free. The most profound lesson from this story is that your true worth is never defined by toxic family members who constantly belittle you. When faced with deep unfairness and systemic favoritism, the absolute best response is not immediate anger, but silent perseverance. By secretly building your own independent skills and financial stability, you create an unbreakable armor. True justice does not always require malicious revenge. It simply requires stepping into your own power and letting the truth expose their greed. Ultimately, walking away from toxic blood ties to celebrate your hard-earned success remains your greatest and sweetest victory in life.